Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is distorted reality in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 10, The First Guru. In this world and his own, Aang had never seen Appa so determined to head underground. He didn't know if it had to do with a desire to rescue Zuko or defeat the spirit badger mole that had kidnapped him, but it was Appa who led the way through the tunnel leading into the mountains. Even by firelight, he could see that the tunnels had been constructed of a red, dusty stone, like ochre, and they crisscrossed into a labyrinth that brought to mind the cave of two lovers, fitting, since both had been constructed by badger moles. Aang and Azula flanked Appa on both sides with flames to light the way while Toph and Teo walked behind them. "I've never seen badger moles do anything like that," said Toph, her voice coming out in a grumble. "And I know badger moles." "Unsurprising," said Azula. "Both of you are brutish creatures." Toph pounded a fist against the cave wall. "Tippy toes, did you hear something? Sounded to me like someone's in the mood to get their butt kicked." Teo jumped away from her in surprise. Am I tippy toes? Or did you mean twinkle toes? I lost track." Azula laughed. "Oh, please. We all know the one who had a proper master would prevail in a fight. Care to test that theory out?" Aang let out a groan. He put a hand to his forehead and noticed for the first time that day that he must have forgotten to put on his headband in the morning. "Ugh, guys, can we not do this right now? We have to find Zuko. I don't know why a spirit would have taken him. It's a little concerning." "Well, I already told you I can't sense where that spirit badger mole went. It's not making any vibrations in the earth like a real badger mole would," Toph said. Teo rubbed his chin. "Aang, if it's a spirit, can't you sense it or something? You're supposed to be the bridge between our two worlds, right?" Aang sighed. "If only it was that easy," he said. Another thought occurred to him. Usually spirits get mad like that as a reaction to something bad happening in nature. Can you think of anything like that around here? "Not that I know of," Teo said, shrugging. Aang also had to consider the possibility that Teo could unwittingly be responsible, since he and his mother were the only humans around, but he didn't want to jump to any conclusions yet. Or have the water tribes done anything bad around here? He shook his head. "No. Like I said before, they just pass through the channel sometimes." They left a trail of footprints as they walked. Red sand coated the ground in a fine dust, and it reminded Aang that the Si Wong Desert began not far to the northwest of them. Periodically, Toph would stomp her feet to try and get a reading on the tunnel system, but failed to track either the badger mole or Zuko. Meanwhile, Appa looked increasingly agitated, letting out grunts and growls as his 6 feet scurried through the tunnels, sometimes at a pace even faster than the rest of them. Aang patted one of his legs after catching up to Appa in one such instance. "What's wrong, buddy? Are you worried about Zuko?" Azula brushed a hand through her bangs. "I don't suppose he can slow down so he stops kicking up all that dust with those big feet of his, can he? He keeps getting dirt in my hair. Somehow, I'm not surprised that the big hairy monster is showing more concern about Zuko than Spice Queen is," said Toph. "Besides, a healthy coating of dirt is good for you." Azula scowled. "Sorry, some of us bathe. And if you're joining our little group, I expect you to wash yourself on a regular basis as well, at least 3 times a week and any night we spend in a town or near a river. I didn't do that with the freedom fighters and I don't plan to start now." Toph put both hands behind her head and grinned. "You disgust me," says the girl who just stepped in wolf bat poop. "What? Ugh." Azula's repulsed exclamations rang out through the tunnels and she dragged her boot across the sand in a frenzied dance. Aang thought it best to ignore them and walk ahead with Appa. Teo sidled up to Aang and kept pace with him. "Are the two of them always like this?" "It's a bit of an improvement, actually," Aang said, giving him a tight grin. "They used to try and kill each other." Despite its feet bounding against the hard-packed, sandy ground, Zuko barely felt jostled as the badger mole lugged him around in its claws to a destination he couldn't guess. Dark tunnels shifted out of their way like the mountain itself bent to the badger mole spirit's will, forging paths and breaking walls at a whim. The creature made no noise, made no effort to squeeze him in its grip, but no amount of struggling helped Zuko break free. He expected the animal to smell like a mix of musk and dirt, but it didn't seem to have a scent at all. He tried wriggling free, fire-bending at it, even singing, but nothing worked. He didn't want to give up and just let the spirit drag him away, perhaps to the spirit world, never to return, but something inside of him, something that felt like the scarred firebender, told him he should wait and see what would happen. He'd been unprepared for the sudden, blinding light when yet another rock wall fell away. He squinted and covered his eyes, but something about the harsh heat of the sun felt revitalizing in a way it never had before, and when he could open his eyes he found himself in what looked like a hollowed-out mountain. Red stone rose up on all sides, almost like the inside of a caldera but narrower and with a smaller opening high above him, which let in sunbeams at a perfect angle to hit him directly. Despite the fact that this place should have gotten limited sunlight most of the day and its proximity to the desert, fresh green grass covered the reddish soil. Wild flowers grew among the grass, dotting it with all sorts of colors. When he turned around to take in the whole view of the hollow, he almost stumbled backward when he came face to crumbled face with an ancient statue. Just past it, the oldest temple he had ever seen stood tall, structured as if carved from the inside of the mountain. It was unlike any temple Zuko had ever seen, with mismatching blocks stacked on top of each other in varying shades of red and ochre that gave him the impression it could topple at any moment, but thick, massive pillars supported it near the bottom and seemingly prevented that from happening. In his surprise, he hadn't noticed that the badger mole had vanished. It didn't even drop him onto the ground, instead, he just found himself standing up and he didn't remember how. He examined the statue closer for a clue as to where he'd found himself, but age had worn away all of its features, even clothing. Just when he started to consider exploring the inside of the temple, a man appeared in its doorway. Whenever Zuko pictured an old sage, if Uncle Iroh didn't come to mind, then this was the sort of man who did. He looked like the sort of old man Zuko sometimes saw in paintings of ancient scholars and spiritualists, with a long white beard that reached down to his waist and a thin mustache nearly as lengthy. He wore his hair up in a bun of the Earth Kingdom style, with worn and frayed robes that dragged on the ground. If they once had any color, it had long since faded away to a dull brown. A gnarled wooden staff completed the picture and Zuko almost expected him to move like wet ink on a page, but when he gestured in welcome he was all flesh and blood. "I offer my sincere apologies for any alarm," the man said. Even his wide sleeves dragged almost to the ground. "I gave the badger mole spirit specific instructions, but it seems she failed to bring the avatar to me like I wished." The spirit in question flashed into existence behind the man for a moment, sniffed the air, and then vanished again. Zuko took a step back. You can control them? Even though they're spirits?" "Control? No," he said, shaking his head. "To control a spirit is to control a force of nature. We can only bend with them, live harmoniously with them. Other spirits who reside in these mountains notified me of the Avatar's presence nearby and I'd told the badger mole to seek him out, but I didn't think bring me the boy who is attuned to his selves could be misconstrued, yet here we are." Zuko furrowed his brow. "I don't know why it mixed me up with him." The old man rubbed his chin. "I wonder. I would think that would only refer to the Avatar, by nature of his past lives, but perhaps there is more to you than meets the eye. What do you want with the Avatar, anyway?" Zuko didn't care about that. Aang was the one he worried about. "Why don't you come inside the temple?" the old man asked. "I could make you some tea and then we could talk." Zuko stood his ground. "I don't think so." "Ah," said the man. He sat down on the grass, folded his legs, and lay his staff across his lap. "Forgive me again. It has been so long since I've been around another person that I've forgotten some simple courtesies. It's understandable that you wouldn't trust me. But I am Shen, a guru in these parts." At Zuko's questioning look, he clarified. "A spiritual teacher. Though I suppose I haven't done much of that lately since I've come here to seek enlightenment in solitude." Zuko sat down in the grass but didn't move any closer to the man. "Zuko," he said, by way of introduction. "To answer your questions, I cannot be entirely certain why the badger mole would have confused you with the Avatar, other than the possibility that you are more at peace with another part of yourself, perhaps something foreign, than he is." When Zuko struggled to find the words in response to that, Shen continued. All I hoped was to give the Avatar some advice, and perhaps a lesson, to help him. Zuko wasn't sure what part of himself he'd made peace with better than Aang did, but he wondered if it had something to do with the scarred firebender. Either way, not something he felt equipped to ponder. If he had Uncle here, he'd be better for helping Zuko sort out any thoughts of a spiritual nature. Best to focus on the things he could understand. What is this place? The old man smiled. Ah, it is a lovely place, isn't it? This temple is long forgotten by many of today's sages, but I do believe this is an early Avatar temple. Perhaps even the birthplace of the first Avatar ever born in these lands, long before even the four nations came to be what they are today. A scholar might even surmise that the red stone was once used in paints and pigments, and valued for its unique qualities. The first Earth Avatar? Zuko asked. He'd never thought of such things, if the cycle even had a beginning. Shen held up a single finger. Personally, I believe the very first Avatar was born with fire. It only seems fitting to me for the first person whose responsibility it was to bring warmth and light and order to the world. Which would make this Avatar the second. I have to wonder, do you think any of them ever knew the Avatar would be part of a cycle? He gestured to the featureless statue. This one might have only heard stories about the previous Avatar and never imagined there would be another. Oh, to peek into their heads. Questions like those have fascinating answers, I think. Zuko's gruff response came out before he could stop himself. Is that what you do? Sit here and ask questions that'll never get answered. The Guru chuckled. More or less. I've always enjoyed philosophical debates. Zuko stood. Well, thanks for the conversation, but I should go find my friends. Shen smiled wide enough that it reached his eyes. Oh, I don't think that will be necessary, he said. They're much closer than you think. It seems I'll get to speak with the Avatar after all. I suppose I was fortunate that the other person who fit the criteria I gave to my badger mole friend happened to be one of the Avatar's companions. I've come to appreciate luck like that in my long life. Zuko looked around. Huh. Just as he was about to say he was leaving regardless, intent on leaving this strange place and this even stranger man behind him, the ground rumbled and a space on the wall erupted into a cloud of coppery dust. With fog cover and no fleet to worry about, Katara's warship drifted through Chameleon Bay, around the enemy blockade, and into the strait leading to Full Moon Bay and the Serpent's Pass without being noticed. It was there, on the western lake, they had planned to meet up with the rest of Katara's fleet. Katara's fleet. It felt strange for Sokka to think of it as hers, mulling it over like the taste of a pungent ale on his tongue, a cask that had been soiled and made foul. He'd never heard of a woman, much less a child, like Katara, gaining command of a whole fleet, and he wondered to what lengths she had gone to get Father to approve of it. And to allow her campaign against the grand capital of the Earth Kingdom itself, untested and unbloodied in true battle as she was. It almost made him suspicious, like their father had set her up to fail. Or perhaps it was a test for Sokka, to steer her on course, to act as her advisor and strategist, and prevent her campaign from going astray. That made it easier to swallow. He couldn't conceive of the idea that Katara would get command of a fleet before Sokka otherwise. Despite exiling himself for a couple years, he was still the elder brother. The idea that she had been given command independent of Sokka's involvement was absurd. After all, glory and victory went to both the commander and the strategist. But, against all odds, she managed to control her men well. Her sailors and warriors looked up to her, admired her. Pushed themselves not out of fear or discipline but a sense of genuine loyalty even as they sailed fearlessly through enemy territory. They served her with fervor and hung onto her honeyed words with zeal, for Katara could speak, and speakers had always been valued through the Water Nation's history. Words could inspire men as well as break them, and she had the capability of doing both. Sokka, at least, didn't think she was a big deal. For the first time ever, he consented to duel with her, to train their waterbending together, and she threw herself into it with relish. Eyes alight with the thrill of battle, she threw a deluge of water and ice at him all morning. By night, the idea was for him to begin training in bloodbending, but for now they figured they'd give her men a show. He just didn't expect to come out of it so bruised while she barely looked like she broke a sweat. Though you watched and dutifully awaited orders from her princess, Suki sat against the ship's balustrade and fanned herself with a predatory grin. Care to spar with me next, Sokka? She asked, her makeup making her expression look impish. I think he should rest, said Yu, her brow creased. He's been training for hours. I don't care, said Sokka. He wasn't about to let you coddle him, he had his pride to uphold. Gran had already given him enough of that. Warriors don't get a chance to rest on the battlefield. Suki had a glint in her eye that made him suspicious. Well, Mr. Warrior, I can't wait to see what you can do. We're so gonna take down Ba Sing Se. Hamma strode toward them from behind Sokka and he tried not to jump out of his skin when he noticed her. Perhaps, she said. But brute force alone won't be enough to take down the walls of the impenetrable city. It will take deception, planning, and a great deal of stealth. Cunning will be your greatest weapon. And let us hope the Avatar won't get in our way. Katara straightened her stance and smirked. Well, we don't have to worry about anything on that front. I have a plan in mind to keep the Avatar away from the city in case he does decide to head in that direction. She held up a headband emblazoned with a white lotus that Sokka recognized as the Avatar's. Where'd you get that? Sokka asked. He didn't think the Avatar would be lured away from wherever he was going with the promise of getting his headband back, but if Katara had a different plan in mind he didn't expect her to tell him all of it yet. Oh, he dropped it during our fight, she said. We can use it to our advantage. And don't worry, Hamma, my dear brother has a great deal of cunning. He shrugged. Katara had her own brand of cunning, a form of manipulation that made people like her, a subtle kind that tantalized them with a supposedly sincere bit of gratitude or a reward. They liked her smiles, the feeling that they'd done something good for her. He wasn't stupid enough to fall for her flattery, he knew it to be nothing but her attempt to manipulate him in turn. But he'd play along, slither around her manipulations and keep his head above the current instead of oppose her directly. I've got a great deal of a lot of things, he said, and the words felt so unfamiliar to him that he almost cringed. Instead, his face folded into a simper and, unable to help himself, he glanced toward Suki and Yu, who both fell into a fit of giggles, to his absolute horror. Katara rolled her eyes. Yeah, right. He had no idea where that came from. When the dust cleared, Aang squinted to shield his eyes from the sudden sunlight but readied his staff and sword, only to see Zuko unharmed right in front of them while an old man sat in the grass in front of a derelict temple. Aang lowered his weapons as Appa shuffled out into the sunlight and gave Zuko a big, wet lick. Zuko froze and held his arms away from him, covered in slobber. Hi, guys. After making sure Zuko was all right, Appa turned toward the old man with a low growl. The old man, to his credit, didn't move and only lit up into a smile. Oh, what a majestic creature. How blessed I must be to see one of you in my lifetime. Appa's distrust of the man perplexed Aang, since that was the sort of behavior more typical of his Appa, but Aang walked over to Appa's side and put his hand on one of his furry legs. It's okay, he whispered to his bison. Aang didn't feel anything dangerous about this man, if anything, he felt like part of the environment, peaceful, ancient, and unyielding. This felt like a spiritual place, almost as alive as the spirit oasis in the North Pole. No wonder Aang had thought Zuko had been dragged into the spirit world. At his touch, Appa let out a short grunt and backed down. I am Guru Shen, said the old man, completely unfazed by Appa's aggressive posturing. Welcome to my little sanctuary. You couldn't have just sent a message, could you? Azula asked, lips pursed into a thin line. Or, better yet, come out of here to see us yourself? You just had to do something dramatic like summon a badger mole spirit to kidnap my brother. Toph held up a fist. Yeah. I don't like the fact that you tried to fool me with a spirit. Azula rolled her eyes at her. I don't think he knew about your blindness to do that intentionally, dum-dum. Duh, I know that. Seriously, what is your problem? Do you have something you want to say to my face? You may not have noticed, but I've been saying things to your face this whole time. You're the one who's just tetchy all the time and taking offense. Toph stomped her foot. Tetchy. After he finished wiping off Appa's slobber, Zuko frowned at Azula. What does that even mean? And you two still haven't sorted through whatever's bothering you yet. Teo held up his hand and whispered to Aang. If you ask me, they're both just pretty irritable, aren't they? I apologize for any discord I may have caused, said Shen, inclining his head with his arms spread wide. I only meant to speak with the Avatar. And show him this place, since it may have a connection to one of his past lives. In looking at the statue, Aang felt a sense of its immense age along with a weight in the air that he couldn't describe, but he didn't pick up anything like a name as he did when he first looked upon Roku's statue. Perhaps he tried to reach too far back this time. Either way, whoever they once were didn't matter to him now. It's just a statue, he said. What did you want to speak with me about? There is a lot of value to be found in history, I think, said Shen, looking at the statue with a wan smile. We can learn the mistakes of the past in order to make better choices in the future. A history lesson? Teo asked. Not what I expected. Aang didn't, either. He failed to see how it could be so important that this guru dragged Zuko here to get his attention. Not just any lesson in history, said the guru. But the history of our world. How it came to be. In the beginning, in the primordial void, a singular being of light and darkness appeared from nothing. It was during this time that the spirit world formed around them. In their union, light and darkness created the first lion turtles, perhaps the first and only complete beings, if you ask me. Lion turtles? Aang asked. He felt like he had heard of such a creature, but didn't know where or how. How do you even know this? Toph asked. It's not like you were around back then. Shen stroked his beard. I have it on the good authority of someone I know and trust who once spoke to a lion turtle about such things. Aang's eyes widened, but Azula put a hand on her hip. I fail to see what this has to do with us, but continue. The guru nodded and acquiesced. Eventually, the light and the darkness became distinct from each other, for reasons I do not know, and in their nature became so diametrically opposed that, in some sense, they were paradoxically still together. Locked in combat, sure, but united for eons out of a desire to remove the other from existence. During this time, humans, animals, and spirits began to form. And it is said that each time the light and darkness struck each other, the force of their blows created a new world, reflections of each other and the spirit world. A new world? Teo asked, eyes wide. If they were doing that for eons, wouldn't that mean there are countless worlds? Aang caught Azula's gaze but neither of them said anything. He couldn't read the expression on her face. Indeed, said Shen. You catch on quickly. An interesting story, don't you think? I like to believe that it has some merit. Talking lion turtles, said Azula, scoffing. You can't be serious. Are the light and darkness still fighting? Zuko asked. Or is it, I don't know, like a metaphor for how there's lots of conflict still in the world? Azula looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Well, that's surprisingly deep for you, Zuzu. He shrugged. Kind of reminds me of Uncle's proverbs. Shen smiled. In a sense, you're exactly right. But scholars and sages throughout history who have studied the Avatar have come to think that the very same light spirit is within you. He looked at Aang as he spoke. But what I want you to remember today is that both light and darkness were born at the same time, entwined together, one and the same. And even now, they may not be so separate. And I don't believe that makes them necessarily good or evil. By this point, the sun had passed the rim of the hollowed-out mountain, casting the sanctuary in shadow. Aang swallowed. You said the lion turtles came from a time when the light and darkness were joined, and that made them complete. Does that mean there are pieces missing from the rest of us? Shen clapped his hands together and chuckled. Oh, and there is the question I'd hoped you'd ask. Indeed, I think that is the case. Though as the Avatar, you have a bit more of the sublime in you than the rest of us. Azula crossed her arms. That doesn't make sense. That means humans are fundamentally flawed and I refuse to accept that. Toph let out a loud guffaw. Truth hurts, doesn't it? Maybe now you can get down from that high ostrich horse of yours. Aang shook his head while Azula shot a glare at Toph. I don't like that, either, he said. I don't want to be better than anyone else just because I'm the Avatar. I wouldn't be here today without my friends. But you are a little more whole than everyone else, Shen continued. All that knowledge, power, and wisdom of all your past lives. Though it seems you are not so at peace with those other selves, which is why my badger mole spirit fetched the wrong person for me. His eyes fell to Zuko. It mixed us up, big deal, he said with a shrug. We were standing close to each other at the time. The old man tilted his head. There is a strange spiritual energy that surrounds all of you, he said. His eyes passed briefly over Azula. For some, it is more like a pall that clings to you. All of us. Teo asked, eyes wide. Even me. And you said I might be the one most at peace with this energy, said Zuko, crossing his arms. Why me? And what makes you think it's something spiritual? Aang bit his lip and worry for his friends gripped at his stomach. Wait a minute, what does all that mean? What's clinging to my friends? Is it something dangerous? I can't answer any of those questions, said Shen. But it's something that the spirits have noticed, and I thought I would let you all know. Appa, apparently tired of all the discussion, finally dropped onto his stomach with a groan of satisfaction. Even that bison has been touched, and to me that certainly feels benevolent. Can't you tell us more? Aang asked, his brow furrowed. It doesn't seem right. This spiritual stuff shouldn't be happening to them, whatever it is. He hated the idea that he could have done something to endanger any of them. Zuko scratched his head. Like I said, I don't think it's spiritual stuff. It doesn't feel bad. I'm pretty sure it's related to how I can firebend now. Oh ho, you gained firebending from it? Shen asked, grinning. What a delight. You've certainly been struck with good fortune. Well, isn't Zuzu lucky, said Azula. Her voice came out sharp, reverberating through the sanctuary, and when Aang looked at her he saw her golden eyes through shadowy veil. How wonderful. Now, if it's all the same to you, I think we've wasted enough time here. I've shared all I meant to, said Shen, his arms spread wide. I do hope I was able to aid you, young Avatar. Aang's head whirled with everything he had learned, and with the difficulty of trying to piece it all together in a way that made sense to him. I guess so. Thank you, Guru Shen. The old man stood and bowed, holding his staff behind his back. May you be blessed by good fortune on your journey. Perhaps, one day, we may meet again. The smell of stale alcohol assaulted Sokka's nose when they entered the establishment on the edge of a fishing village on the south shores of East Lake. The smell seeped into the wood of the tables, the walls, the floor, soaked the clothes of the tavern patrons as if they themselves hadn't moved for ages. It had an open center with a roaring hearth fire on the far wall while a veranda encircled the primary part of the tavern. Sokka couldn't see the upper level well, as it wasn't as well lit as the main floor, but up there it seemed significantly less rowdy. A crowd of all types jostled in the center of the room. Sokka could see all the unsavory sorts he could imagine, pirates, bandits, drunks, brawlers, and ex-soldiers of the Earth Kingdom and Water Nation alike, all reveling together despite their differing backgrounds. Sokka supposed this place operated outside of Earth Kingdom law if even his nation was welcome here. With Katara, Suki, and you, he felt supremely out of place. Katara, what are we doing here? He hissed at her out of the corner of his mouth. I told you, she said with an air of irritation. I used to be in contact with a bounty hunter. She's the real deal. He rolled his eye. You and your contacts, he muttered. What makes you think a random old bounty hunter will succeed where we failed? She doesn't have to catch him, she said. Just distract him. Steer him away from Ba Sing Se. A chorus of cheers and jeers rose up from the center of the crowd, and in a break between the people Sokka spotted an enormously muscled man locked in an arm wrestle with a woman much smaller than him. Sokka's eyes were drawn to her bare, tattooed arms, taut with the strain of forcing the man down, but her face betrayed no hint of a struggle. Her opponent, on the other hand, breathed heavily through his nose as his face turned red. With one final push, the woman slammed the man's fist down into the table and the crowd erupted again while she stood up and downed her drink with a flourish. Sokka gaped. Oh, please, said Suki, putting a hand on her hip. I do that all the time. Katara waved to her. Hey, over here. June. The woman, June, caught Katara's eye and smiled as she maneuvered her way through a slew of congratulatory fists and shoulder pats. Up close, Sokka's eyes wandered from the dark makeup around her eyes and lips to her form-fitting sleeveless tunic and whip on her belt. He cleared his throat. "I stand corrected," Sokka said to Katara before the woman came into their range. "This isn't just a random old bounty hunter. She's really nice if you get past the gruff exterior and fearsome tattoos," said Yu. "Well, would you look at that," said June, giving Katara a quick two-finger salute in greeting. "It's the princess squad. Is it time for you to call in that favor?" Sokka slapped his forehead and groaned before turning to Katara and Yu. "Oh, come on. Did you seriously let slip that you two were princesses?" Both of them glared at him and crossed their arms, but June spoke. "No, you just did," she said, chuckling. "Actual princesses, huh? Who would have guessed?" Sokka was about to retort when he realized what he did and the words died in his throat. "It is time to cash in on that favor," Katara said, continuing as if Sokka wasn't even there. She held up the Avatar's headband. "There's someone I need you to find. I think this will suffice for his scent." June took the headband in her hands. "Oh, I think Nilla and I can manage that." They flew on Appa out from the top of the sanctuary after promises from the Guru that his badger mole spirits wouldn't kidnap any of them again. By the time they made their way back to the astronomer's tower, dusk had fallen, so they prepared to spend another night with Teo and his mother. Since the astronomer retreated to the top of the lighthouse to take advantage of another clear night, Aang and the others took their supper with Teo. For the most part, they ate with limited chatter, too caught up in the things the Guru told them and the prospect of the journey ahead. All five of them squeezed in at the table inside Teo's home, thankful for the opportunity to eat indoors for once. "You guys are sure it isn't hurting you?" Aang asked for the fifth time. "Whatever spiritual energy is clinging to you, like the Guru said. I just wanna know why it's strongest in Zuko," said Teo, staring into his chopsticks. "That's what he said, right?" Zuko lowered his bowl of vegetable broth to the table. "Dunno. But like I said, to me it doesn't feel exactly spiritual." "And you gain fire bending from that?" Teo asked, peering at him closely. "I've never heard of such a thing." "I have to find out what kinds of spirits they are," Aang said, leaning back on his stool against the wall. His eyes wandered to the portrait of the Mechanist before he looked away. "I've never heard of spirits that can give people bending before." Zuko frowned. "I told you, I don't think it's a spirit. But bending is spiritual. Well, I don't think we should discount a scientific explanation. It could be my fault, like something's out of balance." Azula's bowl slammed into the table, its contents spilling over the rim. "Just stop talking about it," she said, her face twisted into a scowl. "Zuzu learned how to fire bend. Big deal. Maybe he always had it, but he was just too weak and pitiable to demonstrate it until now." Toph let out a bark of laughter. "Yeah? Or do you think you're just scared your bending newbie big brother is gonna get better at fire bending than you? Seriously, I've never met someone who was so full of themselves." Aang's brow furrowed. He was afraid their bickering would reach a boiling point soon and he didn't have the energy to handle that. "Azula, that's not fair to Zuko. And Toph, don't provoke Azula like that." Toph's eyes widened in disbelief as she sat up straighter. "You're telling me not to provoke her? Listen, I put so much effort into not punching her face in after all the comments Princess Prissy Pants made today. Someone's really gotta knock her down a peg, if you ask me." Azula's nostrils flared. "Don't talk about me as if I'm not here. What's wrong? Can't handle not being the center of attention." Zuko put out his hands as both girls pushed to their feet, glaring at each other. "Toph, you don't really know Azula that well yet, but she just says things like that all the time. Don't take it personally." Toph pointed at him. "You guys really let her talk to you that way? Not a chance that I'm just gonna sit here and take that." Teo had sunk so low that his head now barely poked above the table. Can you guys take it outside, please? I'm not about to let this petty argument devolve into a brutish street brawl," said Azula, sneering. "We all know I'm more sophisticated than that." Looking at her, Aang couldn't help but think she looked even more imperious than usual, with derision in her eyes and haughtiness in her shoulders. He saw something of the other Azula in her and it stunned him too much to say anything. Toph slammed her fists on the table. Ugh, I've had it with your self-important attitude. The freedom fighters had a word for people like you and I don't think you wanna hear it. Aang found his voice again after the sound of her fists on the table startled him out of his reverie. You two better stop now before you say something you can't take back. Toph cracked her knuckles. Oh, I don't regret anything I ever say. The corner of Azula's mouth quirked. Well, that's the first thing we're in agreement on. She spun her hand, palm up, and flames flickered to life at her fingertips that flashed blue for a moment before settling on crimson. And you really think I'm concerned about my brother getting better than me at firebending? Please. Though under my tutelage, even Zuzu will be able to overpower you without any effort. Think you're that good, huh? Are you all talk, or do you think you can back that up? Azula rolled her eyes. If a fight is what it will take to convince you, then by all means. She gestured toward the door. Let's go. Outside, under the light of the stars, Azula and Toph stood across from each other on an open field separated from the lighthouse and Teo's workshop. The mountains where the Guru lived loomed in the distance. Aang, Zuko, and Teo stood nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. Aang, however, had become so exasperated with their constant back and forth that he wanted the two of them to fight it out and hopefully get over whatever bothered them about each other. Even Appa stood with Aang, restless even as Aang did everything he could to calm the bison. Toph cracked her neck. Ever since we met I got the feeling that you didn't like me, she said. And it's always been mutual. You know what I realized? In light of what Aang told us, it makes so much sense. Azula narrowed her eyes and spoke with such a low tone that it made prickles dance up Aang's spine. And why is that? You're crazy and evil, Toph said, her legs spreading into a fighting stance. That's all there is to it. This fight's been a long time calm. Azula cut her off with a blast of blue fire that screamed toward Toph, gouging the earth in its path. Toph pulled up a block of stone to defend herself, but Azula's fire tore through it and the force of the blast pushed Toph back, who had to cross her arms to brace herself. She retaliated by dragging her foot forward, making the ground shift as if a badger mole dug underneath it. A slab of rock erupted under Azula's feet, but she leapt off of it and the force propelled her into the air, where she unleashed a series of red fireballs on Toph below her. Toph stomped her feet and the ground beneath her descended at the same time as a shield covered her from above. As soon as Azula landed, an unseen attack from below launched toward her, but Azula kept on the move, never lingering in one spot for longer than a second and rolling with Toph's blows to take advantage of their momentum as much as she could. The barrage of stones came continuously but Azula was dexterous enough to avoid them, baiting Toph to attack in one direction while she weaved around the blows and closed in on Toph's shield from somewhere else. After one attack with a jagged spike of stone, Azula spun around it and leapt up on a previous earthen ramp Toph had made in order to slide down toward the shield, which she destroyed with an axe kick wreathed in flame. Toph emerged from her hole to find Azula on the offensive, whirling around missiles of stone and dirt to retaliate with arcs of fire. Toph was forced into movement, sliding away from her on an earthen wave, but Azula's assault was relentless, her movements constant. Teo held his collapsible metal pole defensively, as if expecting either one of them to turn on him at a moment's notice. This fight's pretty serious, huh? Zuko looked to Aang. Should we stop them before someone gets hurt? Before Aang could answer, Toph's voice rang out from behind a pillar of stone that she had used to defend herself. Can't stand still, can you? You know, you fight kinda like Twinkletoes. Azula flipped toward the pillar and struck it with a dropkick-empowered blast of flame, making it topple, but Toph jabbed her fists and launched it toward Azula. From the ground, Azula lifted herself up and rolled out of the way just in time for the pillar to slam into the grass where she'd been moments before. Jumping to her feet, she whirled into a spinning kick and a hand movement that produced a disc of fire, both of which cut toward Toph. Appa shuffled his feet and grunted, perhaps in concern about the fire, but Toph ascended on another pillar of stone above the attack, which she leapt off of and came crashing down in a shockwave that made Azula topple. It was Toph's turn to press her attack, stomping her feet to produce boulders that she launched toward Azula, but each attack summoned clouds of dust that obscured Azula's form. Firelight that blinked from within the miniature dust storm was their only indication that Azula still stood, blocking or deflecting Toph's attacks with loud crashes of shattered rock. Just as Toph made her first steps into the dust cloud, she gasped when a wave of fire rolled toward her bare feet, which she just barely managed to cover with dirt as the fire rolled over her clothes. Singed and angered, Toph pulled back her fist to slam it against the ground, but Azula emerged from the dust cloud in a leap with fire wreathing her punch. Toph managed to duck underneath the blow and blanketed herself with a stone shield, but Azula stood over her with a constant stream of fire that superheated the rock. The flames came not from her fist or fingers but from her open palm, washing over the circular stone shield. Aang could see the sheen of sweat on Azula's brow, which focused on the rock in front of her, eyes narrowed in cold anger. The stream of red flame brightened and turned electric blue, its intensity almost blinding in the night. Zuko moved to intervene but Aang beat him to it, shouting for Azula to stop her assault. Before he could rush into the battle, Appa launched forward with a mighty roar directed at Azula, making her flinch away from him and giving Toph the opening to emerge from her shelter. Aang's eyes widened as he regarded Appa. What had moved the bison so much that he felt it necessary to stop Azula? Had he sensed the intent behind her attacks? Did Azula really mean to hurt Toph? Or did Toph mean to hurt Azula? He was about to put a stop to the fight altogether when Toph dove at Azula, bringing the battle into a close-quarters brawl. Azula managed to roll backward and send Toph careening overhead, but when Toph's body slammed into the ground and she pulled herself up to grapple with Azula again, he saw that she wore a wide, toothy grin. With their arms locked together in a struggle of physical strength, Toph let out a laugh through grit teeth. "You've got a lot more fight in you than I expected, prissy pants," she said. "And you're annoyingly stubborn," said Azula, gripping Toph's arms and trying to break her root. She, too, wore a grin, and that convinced Aang to stand down. Even Appa's growls lowered to a disgruntled rumble. What did Toph mean by calling her evil? Teo asked Aang and Zuko. What happened between them? Zuko looked to Aang, but Aang didn't take his eyes off of Azula and Toph. He had no words for Teo. The next morning saw Azula and Toph bruised and battered, but ultimately in better moods after letting out all of their frustrations on each other. As they packed up their supplies on Appa, who rested on his stomach with all 6 of his legs spread out, Aang scratched behind his ears as he thought back on the events of the past few days. His friends knew his secrets and they all decided to remain with him, even after conflict had arisen out of the reveal. But now a new problem in the form of some kind of spiritual influence had plagued them. At least they didn't have to trek through a desert again. And this time he didn't lose Appa. "Are you feeling better now, boy?" he crooned, pressing his forehead into Appa's fur. "See? It wasn't a serious fight. Azula and Toph might even be friends now." Appa grumbled when Azula and Toph together hoisted the tent onto Appa's saddle. They still traded barbs, but Aang couldn't sense any venom in them anymore. "That was an awful throw," Azula said, shielding her eyes from the sunlight as she looked toward the saddle. "You're so short that you missed and now the whole tent came unraveled." "Are you kidding me? You didn't put any strength behind that. If it really did miss, it's all your fault." Teo walked up toward them with his arms crossed, frowning. "You guys are welcome to stay longer," he said. "It's nice having other kids around." "We have to get to Ba Sing Se," said Zuko, climbing up Appa's tail. "Your mom gave us valuable information that could help with the war." Looking at Teo, Aang felt another pang of guilt as he remembered the last time he saw the Teo in his world. "You're welcome to join us," Aang said. If the other boy did indeed have some kind of spirit hanging over him, he wanted to make sure Teo would be alright. The Guru's words haunted Aang, making him toss and turn in his sleeping roll. He leapt onto Appa's head and gripped the reins. "The more the merrier." Teo scratched the back of his head. "I appreciate that," he said. "But Mom needs me. We're the only people around for miles, after all." Aang smiled, understanding. Teo still had family here, and it would be unfair to separate him from it. If only he could have both the Mechanist and the astronomer in this world. "Take care, then," he said. "And tell her thank you for all the help." Teo laughed. She was up stargazing all night. "She won't be waking up for hours, but when she does, I'll pass it along." After they flew away from the lighthouse, Teo waving behind them, Aang craned his neck to look into the saddle at his friends. "Next stop, Ba Sing Se," he said. The grim sense of foreboding settled over him, but only he knew how bad the city had the potential to be. He'd have to fill them in on everything that had happened there so they'd know what to expect. "Are you still planning to hide your identity once we arrive?" Azula asked. "You've stopped wearing your headband." Aang put a hand on his forehead, his fingers resting on the blue arrow. "It's been missing," he said. He didn't expect to feel so wistful about it. Ever since the fight with Katara. But no. I think it's best to let Ba Sing Se's leaders know that the Avatar has come. Chapter 11, The Serpent's Pass. As she did every day, the warrior of Kyoshi applied her makeup carefully, covering the entirety of her face, almost like a mask. As the last of the Kyoshi warriors, Suki did all she could to uphold the ancient tradition. She owed her people that much. Perhaps she was no better than Princess Katara, who hid behind masks of all kinds. She hid her identity and her gender to fool her opponents, to keep from being underestimated. Suki, on the other hand, wore the face paint to intimidate, to conquer her foes. She didn't have any bending skill whatsoever, so she had to do all she could to win. As she applied her lipstick, she thought of her goals to impress Sokka, and grinned at the mirror. There was a gentle knock on her silver door, which coincided directly with the swaying of the ship, causing her hand to jerk erratically and making red paint streak across her white face. Frustrated, Suki nearly growled. "What?" "Princess Katara wants us out on deck," Yu said demurely, stepping into the room. Upon seeing her friend, she brought her hand to her mouth to hide a giggle. "Oh, Suki." "Yes, I know the face paint is messed up," she said irritably. "Tell Katara she can wait." "Suki, you shouldn't treat a princess that way," Yu admonished. "Not only that, but she's our friend. So stop worshipping the ground she walks on." "You're a princess too, aren't you?" Suki pointed out, wiping a wet cloth on her face. She saw Yu's frown in the mirror. "Yes, but you know how that works. What I mean is, stop being so obedient and taking her orders all the time." As Suki fixed the makeup on her face, she watched Yu in the mirror. The streak of black in her hair contrasted sharply with the silvers and blues of the room and the water tribe furs and leathers. "But aren't you loyal to her?" Yu asked in horror. Suki rolled her eyes. "Of course I am. She's practically my sister." Suki turned, finished with her morning routine. She was about to say more, but Sokka appeared in the doorway. "Katara sent me down to get you too," he said, clearly disgruntled by the fact. For some reason, he was wearing green and yellow, the same clothes the Avatar forced him to wear, according to his story. "Right. Coming," Suki said, sheathing her fans and katana on her belt while fastening her foldable shield on her forearm. She practically ran to the door as Sokka turned around to go above deck. Yu sighed, following after the two. Emerging into the sunlight, both Suki and Yu blinked in surprise upon noticing Katara herself in the clothes of an Earth Kingdom citizen, her hands on her hips with a smirk on her face. "Why aren't you two in the clothes you were supposed to wear today? Don't you remember the plan?" Upon her harsh reprimand, Yu winced and Suki groaned. "So I put on all this makeup today for nothing." Katara was garbed in a light green dress, long-sleeved, with a brown leather belt tied around her waist. The dress was cut on both sides to allow ease of movement, revealing white slacks underneath, and brown boots. Her hair, however, stayed the same. "I can't believe both of you forgot," Katara exclaimed, scolding them like children. The pair of girls immediately turned around and went below deck again, to change into the set of clothing Katara had prepared for them personally. As they walked back to their rooms, Yu glanced at Suki. What happened to disobeying her orders? Suki scowled. "Be quiet." Katara's scheme, while not exactly clever and perfect, was simple and effective. It involved dressing as Earth Kingdom refugees and going into the city just like any other, working their way up to the palace and forcefully taking the throne from the generals currently in power. Since there was currently no king, he was missing, along with the kings from the different city-states, transferring power would be painfully easy. All the while, they'd be using a distraction in the form of a siege on the outer walls. Personally, Suki couldn't wait for the fighting. Her disguise was pilfered from the female guard of a caravan, and was thus suited for combat. Her upper body consisted of a green leather vest, with long white sleeves and a tunic on top, reaching nearly to her knees. Matching white pants, brown boots, and a strange military hat completed her uniform. Her short, auburn hair was pulled up into a ponytail in the back of her head. Regarding herself in the mirror, she regretfully washed off all her face paint. Again, she equipped herself with her weapons. She didn't care if they didn't fit the required weapons of a guard. She wasn't going anywhere without her fans, sword, or shield. Going back out into the hallway, she met Yu, who was wearing the thin, brown, and tattered robe of a peasant, with long, wide sleeves and a slightly trailing hem around her feet. Her heavy katana looked strangely in place on her hip. A brown shawl was draped around her shoulders, probably for use once they got into the city, to hide her white hair. "This isn't too bad," Yu remarked as they walked back outside to Katara. "I guess not," Suki agreed. "Now let's go before we keep Katara waiting any longer." Outside, Katara was tapping her foot impatiently, but grinned when she saw them. "Perfect. 2 ordinary Earth Kingdom girls." Suki rolled her eyes. She was born an Earth Kingdom girl. "So what's the plan? Are we just gonna march up to the walls, knock on the gate, and ask to be let in?" Suki asked, adjusting the armlet for her folding shield. "Most peasants get into the city by a ferry that comes from a place called Full Moon Bay. They think we know nothing about it, but it's on the water, and we know everything about hidden bays in every single coastline in the Earth Kingdom. The ferry goes into a cave right beneath the outer wall, and emerges in Ba Sing Se's only port, where customs and such are." Katara paused for dramatic effect. "That's where a naval fleet will be attacking right as we arrive. Are we going to go on the ferry, or will we be riding with the invasion force?" Yu questioned politely. "Neither," Katara said. Now, Sokka was listening intently to the plan, curious. "We'll be spotted if we go with the fleet, and the ferries would obviously stop their journey the moment they hear news of an attack. So what will we do instead?" Sokka asked, regarding her coolly with his single eye. "We'll be going on foot, through the Serpent's Pass, a narrow land bridge that leads right up to Ba Sing Se's front door. We'll have nothing to do with the attack," Katara said proudly. Sokka gaped in shock, while the 3 girls seemed as if they didn't realize the dangerous plan Katara had just proposed. "The Serpent's Pass?" Sokka erupted. "No one in their right minds would ever go through there. The locals avoid it at all costs. It's the deadliest pass in the Earth Kingdom. What, do they think some giant, scary serpent lives there?" Suki scoffed, as both Katara and Yu laughed at him, the latter behind her sleeve. "Yes. That's exactly what they say." Sokka yelled at them. "Brother," Katara said, shaking her head as if explaining something to a young child, "it probably just got its name from the narrow, winding path I saw on the map. Stop being ridiculous." "Oh, please. I used to live by the Unagi." "Nothing can be worse than that," Suki told him. "There are so many holes in this plan," Sokka moaned. "Your stance is wrong and that fire was pathetic." Azula shot at her brother, her hands calmly folded behind her back as she walked all around him. "You're letting your legs become too wide and your breathing is erratic. You'll lose control that way. You must be diligent and precise." "I'm trying," he protested, trying to calm his breathing. "Don't talk back to me. 50 hot squats, now." "What? Now? I'm not." 100. Zuko sighed. 1 hot squat, 2 hot squat. Several feet away, Aang looked over at Azula nervously. "Maybe I should help Zuko," he said to Toph. "No, because you're busy with me," she said. "If you've got enough energy to worry about Sparky over there, then you clearly aren't carrying enough weight on your back." She stomped her foot against the ground, shooting a rock into the air to land on the growing pile that was on Aang's back. He strained under the weight and used his earthbending to keep as few as he could from falling. To make things even more difficult, Toph periodically shook the ground, much to Azula's annoyance as she tried to train Zuko. "Maybe we should get moving," Zuko suggested after a while, clearly tired with training. It's a long, long way to Ba Sing Se, after all. He paused. Ha, get it? Like the song. He joked tiredly. No one was amused. Why isn't anyone in this little group funny? Toph mumbled. I got more laughs out of Longshot's antics, for crying out loud. This is fairly ominous, you noted, staring at the words carved into the wooden entrance at the entrance to the pass. Abandon hope. How dreadful. I hope Sokka won't bumble his way through here and make this potentially dangerous for us, said Katara, glancing at her brother with his arms crossed. Why would I do that? He asked, mildly insulted. Oh, remember the time when you got 2 fishhooks stuck inside your thumb? Or how about when you tripped and fell into the canal, got run over by a gondola, overturned it and soaked everyone nearby with your waterbending, panicked a whale wolf into attacking nearby pedestrians, which finally culminated in several collapsed houses as a bunch of soldiers tried to calm the thing down. Katara reminded him. Not to mention the time when. All right, I get it. He shouted over her, much to Yu's amusement. Meanwhile, Suki already walked ahead. Are you guys coming or not? She asked, fanning herself. Katara looked up at her and nodded. Yeah. Let's go. Katara walked past Suki, insistent on taking the lead. Suki followed right behind her, followed by Sokka while Yu brought up the rear, her hand resting gently on her katana. Her gaze fell on the horizon. Nighttime was coming. Being waterbenders, both Katara and Sokka preferred the night, traveling and training while they were at their strongest. But something about this pass made Yu anxious, a light, nagging feeling. And she knew to trust her senses at night. Maybe we should have listened to Sokka, she said to herself. She quickened her pace to get to Sokka's side, having lagged behind. You feel how dangerous this place is, don't you? He asked her without being prompted. I do, she said. He grinned. You're almost like a waterbender yourself. I've never heard of someone getting weird powers at night. I guess I'm unique. She smiled warmly at him. Her black bangs fell over her startlingly blue eyes. If only you knew the extent. You haven't changed at all, Sokka went on. I guess Katara and Suki need your level-headedness. Yu giggled, tugging on her long brown sleeves. Yeah. But you're the idea guy. We need you, too. Several feet in front of them, Suki rolled her eyes. Then she spotted something. Hey, look. A water tribe ship, she pointed out, drawing Sokka and Yu's attention away from each other. The sleek silver ship was burning gold as the sun's rays hit it as it set. How pretty. Yu chimed. Is that the fleet already? The one that's moving to attack Ba Sing Se? Suki asked. Yeah. We have to hurry, Sokka answered. We don't want them invading before we even get there. Well then, Yu smiled, let's get going. Only Sokka caught the false step she made, towards the edge of the cliff, and grabbed her just in time for the rock under her feet to crumble as she cried out in surprise. He pulled her back toward him. The rocks crashed into the ocean. Yu stuttered. Nice save, brother, Katara complimented, grinning. You surprised me. Suki averted her eyes. Nothing special. I could have done it. Wow. Yu breathed. Thank you, she said to him sincerely, her face flushed. Sokka continued walking, finding himself unusually annoyed by his sister's comment. Yu frowned. What's wrong? Geez, his mood swings more than Katara's, Suki muttered under her breath to Yu. Night had fallen fully, and Katara had surprisingly called for them to rest. They made camp in an alcove of rock that was protected on all sides by outcroppings of stone. Katara chose this spot strategically, it seemed, and she chose it well. But then, Sokka thought, who would attack them in this abandoned pass anyway? Sokka rounded a corner with his bundle of sleeping things, only to walk in on Suki, who was changing her clothing in relative seclusion. He yelled out in surprise and dropped everything to the ground. Suki, pulling off her guard uniform, turned to him in only her undergarments. What are you doing? Sokka bumbled, scrambling for his things in order to hurry away as fast as he could. Just getting ready for bed. What's the big deal? If anything, Suki seemed amused, her hands on her hips and regarding him without a care in the world. She came closer, only for Sokka to back up against the rock wall, slumping lower and lower. Don't you have any modesty, woman? He asked, his voice cracking. You're only wearing a few pieces of cloth. She grinned, almost with a feral enthusiasm. You're blushing. She bent down to look him straight in the eye, and Sokka fearfully found his eyes wandering. Does this make you uncomfortable? He gulped, trying to find air to breathe. Suki pulled back up to her full height, laughing. Looks like you're all talk when it comes to girls. Before Sokka could respond, the two of them heard a soft pattering of another pair of feet. It was Yu, rounding the corner, fully clothed, her white hair gleaming in the moonlight. Katara's got the fire started, oh. Upon seeing an almost naked Suki standing over the prince, Yu froze and her face turned an even deeper shade of red than Sokka's. Well. If you two want to eat something. I mean, food. Oh. Oh dear. And she hurried away as quickly as she came. Well, that was strange and awkward, Suki blurted out. She had the grace to help Sokka stand, who felt strengthened by his height advantage over her. Put some clothes on. He ordered clumsily, and scurried away even faster than you did. Once he was gone, Suki rolled her eyes. Aang observed Azula's bending closely, watching as she sent numerous, uncontrolled punches into the air, releasing torrid amounts of flame with each blast, each one a chilling blue. He remembered the training of Zhang Zhang and the Sun Warriors. Blue fire was fueled by killing intent. And if Azula was using it during training, alone, what did that mean? There was finally a lull in the amount of fire she was giving off as she was forced to rest, slumping over and panting heavily. Aang wondered if this malevolent spirit, whatever it was tiring her. As he was about to open his mouth, she unleashed another furious explosion of blue, a wide, consuming torrent, capable of destroying rock. Before it hit the edge of the rock quarry, the fire was dissipated into the air, and she saw Aang, lit by the moon, taking its place. How long have you been here? She asked him, breathing deeply, her tight bun becoming undone. The green ribbon was lank and hanging from her hair. When did you notice me? He asked back. She turned. I didn't. A few weeks ago, you would have. I know. Azula, I'm concerned for you. She shot him a dark look. I told you already, you shouldn't be. I can handle it myself. You need your friends to help you shoulder your burdens. An important person to me told me that, he said. Who? Katara. She spat. Why don't you get out of here and go back to your girlfriend? Her fingers twitched. She found a deep, deep part of herself yearning, moving, uncoiling like a dragon. You want to kill him? I do not. She protested against the voice, the pressuring influence, the burning against her mind. No, Aang said, somehow getting in front of her without her noticing. I want to help you. You're important to me, Azula. He laid a gentle hand on her shoulder, causing her to shiver and recoil. You have been ever since I met you. I killed all your friends. I helped destroy your world. She tried to turn away, but he grabbed her wrists. Azula, please, listen to me. That wasn't you. It never was, and I didn't blame you once. Azula watched him closely, warily. It was strange to see him as emotionally evocative as this, to see his grey eyes swirling and storming instead of being an impenetrable slate. It was as if something was changing him, too. I'm going to tell you something that I never even told my friends from my world. Aang was staring into her eyes with so much force, so much feeling, as if he were trying to peer down into her soul. Azula drank it all in, imprinting it in her mind forever. Deep down, he continued, I never even blamed Princess Azula for everything she did. At these words, the princess spirit inside of her flared. What? She asked him breathlessly. She was being controlled, pressured to be the best, so much that it really seemed to be tearing her apart. I felt bad for her, he admitted, finally averting his eyes. A part of me really wanted to help her, too. He's lying. I pieced it together after learning everything I could about her from Zuko, Aang went on. Prince Zuko, I mean. He spoke low. Both of them grew up in the worst way possible, but Zuko at least had his mother and uncle to support him. Azula didn't. Mother hated me. She hates you, too. I wanted to save her. So you think you'd be helping her, through me? Azula's eyes were wide, almost disbelieving. Kind of, Aang said. But you've been straying down a dark path. Don't listen to him, he's lying to you. But to Azula, the princess' argument sounded weaker and weaker. I want to save you, Azula. I need you. I need all of you. Her heart was beating rapidly. You're mine. He hugged her. She heard glass breaking, a mirror. This was the first time Aang had ever reserved this kind of contact just for her. Aang, she whispered. And she cried. I didn't see you as the outdoorsy type to be able to start a fire. Katara looked up from her work, rolling her eyes at her brother as he strolled into the camp, little more than an alcove of rocks with the campfire in the center and their sleeping mats all around it. Upon seeing the faces of Suki, who looked strangely triumphant, and Yu, who looked horrified, the princess couldn't help but wonder what had happened between the three. Sokka himself seemed to have a significant amount of discomfort, glancing periodically at Suki as he sat down. Don't insult me, brother, she responded, offended. The boy grinned. Point 1 for Sokka. At least I can dodge icebergs, she retorted cruelly. She smirked as he rose in anger, but then he seemed to decide against it, turning away from her with furrowed brows and crossed arms. Suki and Yu looked at the battle between the two siblings. You mean you're still bummed about the iceberg test? Suki asked bluntly. That was nothing. You were just a kid. I don't care, he said obstinately, fixing his eye on the campfire. I don't want to talk about it. Oh, come on. It's obviously bothering you, Suki pressed. Confront it or it'll bother you forever. Seriously, what's the big deal? Katara's eyebrow rose. It's an important trial that every male in the Water Tribe faces to show that they've entered manhood. I don't expect you to understand. You weren't there, he said coldly. She slapped him on the head, causing him to glare at her. Hello? I was there. It was just a few days after your mom found me, remember? She reminded him. Well, you wouldn't understand how important it is, then. Your Earth Kingdom. So you have no say in this, he shot at her. She stood up now, towering over him. Yeah. So what? It doesn't mean I'm as dumb as a rock. I've lived with you guys almost my entire life, I've obviously picked up some Water Tribe customs by now. Suki stalked around the campfire, ranting. And you know what? I'm tired of your superiority complex, too. Just because we're girls, and that I'm kingdom-born, yeah, we're weaker than you and we don't matter? You get to order all of us around? Well, here's news for you, Sokka. Not only can all three of us kick your butt, since you're apparently not a real man yet, you don't have the right to make us do what you want. Katara burst out laughing at Sokka's abrupt silence. That was a low blow, Suki. You glanced sadly at Sokka, but spoke softly to Suki. You never told me how you met Katara and Sokka. How did you become Water Tribe? She intervened, trying to peacefully diffuse the situation. Suki looked at her as if she forgot the Northerner was there. That's right, you wouldn't know, Suki said. Sokka leaned back against the rock, thoroughly beaten and humiliated by the Kyoshian. He was glad the conversation steered into a totally different direction. Not a lot of people do, said Katara. Most people think she's just Chief Hakeda's adopted daughter. I was born in a place called Kyoshi Island, Suki began, turning her back on Sokka. I don't remember much about it, or who my parents are. I think they both died in the war. Both of them were warriors. Kyoshi warriors, like your fighting style. That's what it's from. You questioned, surprise entering her voice. And they allowed women to fight. Yep, Suki confirmed, nodding. A long time ago, it used to be only for women until the war started. She unfurled fan, which reflected the light of the fire and cast her face in gold. It's an old fighting tradition that even some people in the water tribe picked up, since the island is so close to the South Pole. Anyway, I don't remember much, but after a tentative peace with the South Pole, Kyoshi Island was taken over and, according to Katara, most of my people were killed. You're not upset? You asked, astounded and horrified. But that's just monstrous. What? Our nation does it all the time, Katara said with a shrug. You're too naive, Sokka said, deciding to re-enter the conversation. The white-haired girl frowned and focused her eyes on her clasped hands. I told you, I don't really remember anyone, so. Suki stared into her reflection in the fan. I guess I'm not really bothered too much. I haven't really thought about it. The northern princess looked unconvinced. Really, It's nothing. Anyway, Katara continued for her. Our mom was one of the healers in that battle, found Suki, and took her in. That's all there is to it, really. I got a sibling cooler than Sokka and we both got another playmate. Sokka wasn't amused. Dad didn't care too much. Back then, he was willing to do almost anything Mother wanted, Katara said. And that was a long time ago, Sokka put in. Yes. It was, wasn't it? Katara gazed into the fire, which was dying from a lack of care. Well, let's get to sleep. We have a long way ahead of us in the morning. Far away, a four-legged creature was pounding against the ground, sending light seismic waves in every direction. It was noticeable enough to wake a sleeping girl. Topha's eyes opened. Guys, something's coming. And it's coming fast. Aang answered immediately, surprising her. She didn't know he was awake. What is it? It's some animal, but it's headed right towards us, Toph answered. How can you tell it's coming to us specifically? Azula mumbled. It's just some animal. Because as it gets closer, it picks up speed. We need to move. The earthbender urged them. As it got closer, Aang could feel it, too. Guys, load everything on Appa. We should get out of here. He locked his eyes on the rock quarries where the beast would probably be appearing. Now, Aang was doubting his choice for camp. He decided to rest in a lower, enclosed area instead of a higher one where they would have a possible advantage in a fight. And since the beast was intent on them, as Toph said, then it probably had a rider. Zuko rose to action, waking up the bison and throwing things haphazardly into the saddle. Azula joined him as Toph laid her hand against the ground. It's here. Ashirsha leapt over the rocks that were surrounding their camp, lithely coming to a stop in a crouched stance, facing them. The Shirshu's owner snapped her whip. Didn't expect you to be awake at this hour, June said with a dark smirk. That'll make things a little more challenging. Get going, guys. I'll distract her. Aang spun, gathering momentum for a swing of his staff, and unleashed concussed air that hurtled toward the bounty hunter that he knew personally, which she managed to dodge by maneuvering her mount around it. Not only was he grabbing her attention, he was simultaneously showing her that he was the Avatar, and her probable target. He leapt to the higher ground, drawing her away from his friends. In his world, Aang was almost positive that she managed to survive in the 2 years after Sozin's comet. They ran into her on a number of occasions, and after some convincing, she was willing to help them without any price. They met her through Zuko, but she didn't have a problem remembering Aang, Sokka, or Katara. She was a valuable ally with a treasure trove of reliable information and fighting skills, but Aang wasn't sure if he wanted to call her his friend. Nonetheless, he didn't want to hurt her, which was another reason why he wanted to keep his friends out of the battle. Are you a bounty hunter? Aang asked her innocently, crouched in a position in which he was ready to spring. She was fast, and he needed to stay on his toes. Not only was the Shirshu's paralysis dangerous, but her whip was as well. What gave it away? She questioned, amused. The Shirshu, was its name Nilla? Launched itself at him, barbed tongue flicking out of its mouth. Aang threw up a barrier of wind just in time to deflect it, but was forced to leap out of the way of June's whip, which was strong enough to make a small gouge in the stone where he was standing just before. Landing lightly on a higher rock, Aang pressed his questions. Who hired you? I'm afraid that'd be a breach of contract, she told him, urging her beast into a chase. Aang was forced to keep moving. The Shersha was no match for him in speed, but it was still fast enough that he was unable to stay in one spot. They wanted you alive, so if you came quietly, you'd be able to see. Thanks for the offer, but I'll have to pass, he responded, running against the rock wall and riding on his air scooter to gain speed and quickly outreach both Shershu and rider. While he was safe and with the high ground, he tried to think of a way to get rid of her, but the ground underneath the massive creature erupted. Aang grit his teeth. That was earthbending, and he didn't want Toph to get involved. She didn't know how June fought, and that was one of the only advantages someone could have against her. Predictably, Nilla managed to jump away from Toph's attack, sustaining minimal damage, but Toph emerged from the hole in the ground and launched a number of sliding pillars at the bounty hunter. An earthbender? June mused. You're no match for me. I've fought tons of you. The Shershu barreled over Toph's attacks, speeding right at her. Aang jumped down again in an effort to divert its attention. Good luck with that attitude, Toph called. I'm better than all the rest. She lifted her arms to slide away on a slab of stone, but she didn't count on the monster's long, thin tongue being used as a weapon. She couldn't see it, anyway. It scored a direct hit on her shoulder, sending the small girl tumbling into the rocks. Aang gripped his staff, but was slightly thankful for Toph's diversion, which allowed him to hit June with a ball of compressed air squarely from the side, launching her off of her saddle. As she was sent flying, Aang landed on the Shershu's back, gripping its reins as it bucked wildly. Come on, Nilla. Calm down. This was child's play for him. I once wrestled the Unagi into submission, he boasted to the Shershu proudly. Lying on the ground, June looked up at the Avatar as he rode her steed, her hair mussed up and her forehead bruised. He knows Nilla's name. She rubbed her head. That kid's got more punch than I thought. Nilla was nearing the levels of a rampage, refusing to yield to Aang. Just as he was about to get off and retrieve Toph, he spotted Appa flying over the rocks, Azula and Zuko on his back. Appa turned his back to the Shershu, lifting his tail for a single, powerful blow. Aang wisely chose this moment to jump off of Nilla's back as a powerful gust swept the Shershu off its feet, slamming it into a rock wall. Aang ran to Toph's side, spotting Sabishi who was feebly trying to lift the little earthbender into the air herself. Aang shooed her away and carried Toph in his arms. What the heck, Twinkletoes? She yelled in his ear as he jumped to Appa. Why can't I hit you? That thing was called a Shershu. It has a tongue covered in paralyzing venom. It'll wear off soon, he informed her, landing safely on the saddle. Sabishi fluttered to his head. What a shame. I was hoping Toph wouldn't be able to cause a ruckus with her earthbending anymore, Azula sighed. Too bad it's not permanent. Hey. Before Appa rose higher into the air and further away, Aang turned and shouted back at the bounty hunter. See you later, June. Another friend of yours? Zuko asked. You can say that, Aang replied. I wonder how she found us? Someone hired her and had to give her something that belonged to us, so she could track us by scent. She's kinda scary that way. You used to know some crazy people, Zuko said, shaking his head with amusement. Trust me, we haven't even met half of them. Seriously, Aang. When's this stuff gonna wear off? I need to hit something. Katara had them up bright and early with the intent to get them through the pass and ready to enter Ba Sing Se just as the siege was happening. Hopefully, everyone would be preoccupied with the attack more than examining the histories of 4 new refugees. But, Sokka reminded himself, that was something he needed to worry about later. The group was mostly silent as they walked, as Sokka was still unwilling to speak to Suki after last night, while Yu trailed behind him, trying to avoid looking in his direction as much as she could. She felt guilty for not speaking up for him in defense against Suki and Katara. In a short time, the 4 came across a part of the path that was sloping downward until it was totally submerged beneath the water. Katara kept walking as if it were nothing, stepping lightly against the surface of the water without a care for her companions. Shrugging, Sokka followed her, creating stepping stones of ice beneath his feet. Suki and Yu halted before the water. What are we supposed to do? Suki asked. Katara turned, as if surprised by the question. You'll have to swim, I guess. That's so not fair, Suki protested. Sokka glanced at his sister. She rolled her eyes. Oh, fine, Katara acquiesced. She gestured in Suki's direction, freezing the surface of the water and allowing her to walk on it. Yu was about to follow, but Sokka stopped her. Come on, Yu. We'll go a different way, he said. Her eyes widened as he pressed his hand into the water, drawing up the sea around her in the shape of a bowl and freezing it. It's a boat? She asked unsurely. Foregoing an answer, Sokka slid on the surface of the water behind her, and braced himself against the rock where the path ended. Ready? He asked. She nodded. With a strong kick, Sokka and Yu shot from the path, causing the water to fan on both sides of them. He held on tightly to the icy boat as they sped past Katara and Suki. He enjoyed Yu's exclamations of both fear and glee. On their ice bridge, Suki crossed her arms jealously. Show off. Katara looked between her brother's surprising antics and Suki, amused, but then spotted a dark shape in the water, and Sokka was heading right for it. We've got trouble, Katara announced. Sokka noticed whatever it was in the water just as his sister shouted in warning. The sea rippled as the huge body swam through directly beneath Sokka and Yu. The surface of the water swelled as part of the long, dark shape rose up and out of the water, a tower of green, blue, and even golden scales, the tail of a fearsome monster. It's coming down. Sokka yelled, drawing up his arms in an effort to make some kind of watery defense for himself and Yu. The tail plummeted down with tremendous force, slamming against the surface of the water and throwing the two backward, tumbling through the tempestuous sea. Suki, watch for them. Katara told her friend, leaping into the water herself, intent on confronting the serpent as it coiled through the water again. Standing on the surface, Katara raised her hands as if lifting a great weight, pulling the serpent out of the depths and closer to the surface. As the scales became visible again, she thrust her hands forward, pushing the serpent. Now, she had the center of its body in her hold. She felt the tail and the head writhing, but clenched her fingers, freezing the serpent in place. For the first time, the head broke the surface of the water, letting out a screeching cry. Sokka opened his eye, and almost his mouth, too, upon the surprise that he was totally underwater. Forcing himself not to panic, he tried to orient himself, and looked for the surface. Above him, he spotted Yu, her eyes closed, her near-perfect white hair fanning out all around her. She looked as if she were sleeping serenely. Grabbing her around the waist, he formed ice directly beneath them and let it push him and Yu to open air. The first moment that he could, the prince opened his mouth and sucked in as much air as he could, and then braced himself against his self-made iceberg and coughed. He put Yu into a sitting position, pushing her silky white and drenched hair out of her face. She, too, began coughing. As soon as he was assured that she would be all right, he leapt from the iceberg to join his sister in battle. By the time he reached her on an icy surfboard, it was apparent that she was in complete control of the serpent, dancing and cutting it with ribbons and tendrils of water, expertly maneuvering herself around its dangerous lunges, and holding it in place. When Sokka approached, he slid his surfboard, accompanied by at least a dozen ice spikes, right into the creature's side, causing it to shriek in pain a second time. Must you ruin my fun, brother? She complained to him. Katara rolled her eyes and sighed, holding her right hand in front of her, sternly in place, while her left began lifting a great amount of water from beneath, clenching her fingers as she did so. An enormous spike erupted from the water, directly beneath the serpent, impaling it on the ice. With one last, ear-splitting cry, the serpent fell against the spear that lifted it halfway out of the water. You killed it, Sokka said, in awe and a little bit of fear. Now, the people of the Earth Kingdom might as well name it, the Katara's Pass, for now an even greater monster had conquered it. I didn't I? She said, clearly proud of herself. Well, let's get going. After the two waterbenders managed to get Suki and Yu across the gap in the pass, it was only a short journey to Ba Sing Se. Well, I guess Sokka was right about the serpent, Suki pointed out amusedly. I told you so, he muttered to all three of them. Come on, we're almost there, Katara said. I can't believe it. Ba Sing Se is going to be letting in the water nation right through its front gates. There's the wall right now. Don't celebrate yet, Sokka advised. Too many things can go wrong. Oh, please. The stone is always eventually eroded by the water. We can do this, she said confidently. Yeah, stop being a pessimist, Suki scolded him. This is so exciting. You exclaimed. Look at how big the wall is. Sokka regarded the impenetrable city with a cynical eye. Whether or not they succeeded with their mission, things were about to change for all of them. He wondered if he would see the Avatar there. Chapter 12, City of Strife. We'd been to many towns and cities in our time, but Ba Sing Se was the worst of them. Divided into 3 rings, the people were kept separated on the basis of wealth and status. Peasants and refugees and criminals and nobodies were kept in the lower ring, as far away from the nobility and royalty of the upper ring as can be. Walls divided them, but bureaucracy and secrets kept them further apart. Toph, you, the other you, I suppose, but she isn't much different, hated it most of all. Outside the city walls weren't much better in the wake of Sozin's comet. The Fire Nation had burned the Earth Kingdom down to nothing but dust and ash. Katara once admitted to me privately that she envied Toph's inability to see it, the Ash Kingdom. I didn't have the heart to tell her that Toph and I could see that and more, the bones buried beneath the war and the extermination. The Dust Kingdom, the Bone Kingdom, we called it. Anyway, it was in Ba Sing Se where we lost a friend for the second time. But it was where our defeats truly began. Princess Azula conquered the city for the Fire Nation and set everything in motion for my failure to defeat Fire Lord Ozai by the day of the comet. We tried only once to retake it in the years following. If Azula was able to do it with just 2 people at her side, we reasoned, why couldn't we? We thought we didn't have much more to lose. There was always more to lose. I haven't been back since. The impenetrable city. Its walls still stood as solidly as ever, a bastion of civilization in an otherwise unforgiving and barren landscape, as if the Si Wong Desert expanded and conquered the land itself. As they flew over the arid Earth Kingdom lands, sucked dry by 100 years of fighting with waterbenders, Aang felt a pit of dread in his stomach that only got heavier as they neared the city's walls. It had been so long since his return. He wondered if this was how Iroh felt coming back to Ba Sing Se for the first time since his 600-day siege. As if sensing his discomfort, Sabashi the lemur curled up to Aang's neck and chittered in his ear. He scratched her head and smiled, her ringed tail flicking back and forth in pleasure. Thanks, Sabi. Apple let out a low groan and Aang patted him on the head, too. Things would be different this time. He had Appa. They flew over the wall without incident, passing by the numerous confused Earth Kingdom soldiers standing atop it. All at once, the dead landscape changed to verdant green fields behind the wall, farmland stretching beyond the eye could see. Azula hung off of the saddle, peering down at the ground below. Aren't we going to stop and say hello? No, Aang said. The further we get into the city before we stop, the better. If we go to the lower or middle ring we'll never get through to the city's leaders. They'll make us wait months. Though Aang didn't know what would await them at the upper ring. Kunna and Piandao told them that King Bumi journeyed to Ba Sing Se 5 years ago, after the fall of Omashu, and spoke with King Ki. Ki had proceeded to abdicate the throne and neither of the 2 kings were seen since, though according to Kunna this was a secret kept from the general public. That gave Aang hope that his oldest friend was alive, but it also made an unknown variable. Who was in control of the city now? It couldn't be Long Feng, either. He led the nation of refugees, Ji Duan, back in the Fire Nation. More secrets, more confusion. The farmlands of the outer ring passed beneath them and the flying bison entered the city proper. Zuko and Azula both gasped, but then promptly held their noses. What a huge city, said Zuko. Azula scowled. And a filthy one. It's the result of too many people trying to cram behind the safety of the walls, Aang explained, arms crossed. Kept in squalor and separated from the more fortunate behind even more walls. It's the same in my world. So then remind me again why you'd bring us here. Toph asked, lounging with her hands behind her head. She held a stick of grass in her mouth that kept reminding Aang of Jet. He supposed she picked up the habit from him. That lunar eclipse, he reminded her. The one that might be able to help us defeat the Water Nation before Seirio's moon comes. Though the more he thought about it, it seemed awfully convenient that both astral events would happen in this world in perfect parallel to his own. The astronomer told us one was coming, but hopefully we can pinpoint its exact date with the Earth Kingdom and come up with an invasion plan. Are we even sure that lady knew what she was talking about? Angela asked, rolling her eyes. She could have made the whole thing up or completely deluded herself. Aang pictured the astronomer in his mind again, the woman with 2 large glasses and a wiry frame. Teo's mother, who somehow lived in this world when the Mechanist did not. I think we can be sure, Aang said. There was a solar eclipse in my world. Everything hinged on that. None of them had a response to that, but there wasn't much time for one. Anyway, the upper ring passed by beneath them, and shortly after that, the palace walls. The Earth Palace was exactly how he remembered it, an enormous, fortified compound that was perhaps the biggest in the whole world. The insignia of the Earth Kingdom proudly sat on several walls of dull red plaster, guard towers dotting many of the walls and protecting the numerous ministries and council chambers and gardens enclosed within. Aang half expected to see stone blocks launched at them from the guard towers, but no such attack came. Even so, he still readied himself for an attack. Apple landed in the palace pavilion without any fanfare and Aang leapt off of his head, staff in his hand and meteorite sword on his belt. Members of the royal guard were the first to show themselves, but he was quick to note the Dai Li agents keeping to the shadows of the palace walls. Neither the royal guard nor the Dai Li held weapons or readied earth-bending stances, but all were tense regardless. He remembered that Long Feng, back in the Fire Nation, had brought Dai Li with him when he became king of Jiduan. Shame he didn't bring all of them. Is this the kind of reception the Avatar gets? Angela called, leaping off of Appa to stand at Aang's side. You should be welcoming him with honor and respect. Toph and Zuko followed suit. One soldier pushed ahead of the crowd, a big, bearded man in armor with feet bare. No one gets to see the Earth King without a prior appointment, even the Avatar. You can't just barge into the upper ring without going through the proper procedures. There is no Earth King, Aang said, interrupting before he could finish. He was not pleased to hear about the layers of obstructive bureaucracy again. I know the truth. But I would still like to speak with whoever is in charge. The man crossed his arms and stroked his long brown beard. With a start, Aang recognized him as the general from his world who tried to force Aang into the Avatar state and begin a premature campaign against the Fire Nation with Aang at the forefront. That felt like so long ago. You must be mistaken, Avatar, but I apologize. We will speak in private, within the palace. I am General Fong of the Council of Five. Fong turned on his heel and strutted back to the palace, gesturing for them to follow. The sea of guards parted for them and Aang walked forward with a hint of unease. Toph, was he telling the truth? He whispered to her as they walked. She hesitated. How did you? Oh, never mind. And no, not really. There was a lie somewhere in there, but I'm not sure which part. As they walked through the palace halls, past grand pillars and murals and priceless works of art and antiques, Aang remembered more of his previous visit, like a different life. He had to keep reminding himself that the Dai Li had no reason to attack them, yet, and the palace was safe, for now. Back home they could trust the Council of Five, at least until Princess Angela conquered the city and imprisoned them. The Fong in his world was an idiot, but at least he was on their side. Besides, Aang could understand his reasons now. There was a time where he, too, wished he could unleash all of the power and rage of the Avatar state upon the Fire Nation. The Water Tribe royals and their entourage proceeded across the last stretch of beaten earth toward the city's massive walls, the Serpent's Pass already a distant memory behind them. They advanced on foot, boots and sandals thudding against the dusty road. Sokka's feet hurt. It's like a desert, Suki said. Isn't that Si Wong Desert supposed to be kind of far from here? It is, officially, said Sokka. But the land is all dried out now. It may as well have expanded. I do not know why anyone would want to live here, said Yu, her white hair covered by a tattered brown shawl so that only the streak of black poked out of it. It's so miserable. Katara coughed. Sokka, too, felt like dust got in his throat every time he opened his mouth. Our people did this, she said. Well, the earthbenders too, in retaliation. But it's the only way we are able to fight further inland. It doesn't even feel like there's any moisture in the air for waterbenders to draw on, said Suki, holding her hand out as if to feel it. Sokka cleared his throat. Not at the moment. There's a pretty serious drought in the Earth Kingdom right now. He wondered if 100 years of draining water from the air had something to do with it. We can never forget the price of our conquest. He thought back to his time with the Avatar and their distaste for what his people did, and the way they treasured the rare occasions that they found a lush forest or field, untouched by the war. Sokka brushed his hair out of his eye as he looked ahead to the wall, shielding his face from the sun to get a better look at it. This was the first time he had ever been this close to Ba Sing Se. You know, your hair looks pretty good out of your wolf tail, Suki said, smirking at him. I like it. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling heat there that had nothing to do with the sun beating down on them. Well, we have to blend in with refugees. I like it, too, said Yu with a gentle smile, on his other side. You seem so at ease. Katara rolled her eyes but stopped on the path, staring off to the west. Do you guys see that? Sokka followed her gaze, spotting a distant brown cloud on the horizon. Even from this distance, Sokka could see the winds churning around it. Dust storm, he said. Come on, we need to find shelter. Fast. But it's so far away. Said Yu. We could perhaps make it to the city before it comes. No way, he said, grabbing her by the hand. They move quickly. Let's go. Katara, thankfully, didn't hesitate or question him. She fled off the path to their right, toward the mountains, headed for a crevice in the stone. Sokka, Suki, and Yu sprinted after her, ducking behind a crevice with a rocky overhang just in time for the dust storm to reach them. All four covered their eyes and mouths, pressing against the stone as dust and dirt and sand flooded their vision. Yu had covered her face and hair so that all Sokka could see were her bright blue eyes as she stared at him through the darkness in fear. What sort of spirit causes this? No spirits, he said. These are frequent all throughout the Earth Kingdom. But we're safe for now. He had come across quite a few during his time in self-imposed exile. Earthbenders must have made these shelters for exactly this situation, Suki pointed out, the roar of the wind becoming less deafening as they proceeded deeper into the crevice. You can tell by the way the mountain was carved out. Guess it's pretty handy. She glanced down at Sokka and Yu's hands, which were still twined together. Sokka promptly separated them. Suki continued without a reaction, crossing her face, bare of any makeup that she usually wore like a mask. So, Katara. Does that dust storm put a damper on finding that guy we're supposed to be meeting? Sokka looked toward his sister as they reached the deepest part of the crevice. He had to bend low to avoid hitting his head. What guy? Katara crossed her arms and leaned against the stone wall, smirking. Our contact. Coincidentally, someone who lives in the desert. A sandbender. A sandbender? Are you crazy? Why are you? He waved his hands through the air as he struggled to find the word. Consorting with them. He's key to the operation, Sokka, she told him. He wants to help us, and he needs us, in turn. What reason could he have to help the Water Nation? I have my reasons. A voice came from the mouth of their little cave and Sokka turned to face him, spotting a man with a scarf wrapped around all of his face and head except for his eyes, which hid behind dark goggles. Bandages wrapped around his arms and legs in cloth the color of sand and dark hair peeked out from under his head wrapping. To Sokka, he looked like one of the dead creatures he sometimes heard about in stories, a mummified corpse that rose from the sands. Gashiun, you made it through the storm, said Katara. It's good to see you. Sokka crossed his arms. Of course he did, he's a sandbender. Katara, you can't trust him. Gashiun pulled off his goggles, revealing dark brown eyes that regarded Sokka with just as much distrust as Sokka gave back. He seemed roughly around Sokka's age. Hate me if you want, but I've got info you need. And unless I'm mistaken, your raid on Ba Sing Se is already preparing just offshore. Can't turn back now, can you? If you can't trust him, trust your sister, Suki told him. Katara knows what she's doing. Ba Sing Se is gonna fall. General Fong had called a meeting with the other generals, and remarkably Aang only had to wait an hour before they had assembled and the meeting began. They convened in the War Council chambers, a dark room with high pillars and an enormous rectangular table in the center. Sconces on the walls lit the room as night fell, and servants drew the ochre-red curtains shut before bowing out. Aang only spotted Fong and 2 others seated at the table as they entered, men he vaguely remembered by face if not by name. He noted, curiously, the lack of Dai Li agents in here, but a dozen royal guards lined the perimeter of the room. "Aren't you the Council of 5? Azula asked as they seated. "I only count 3. Apologies, but 2 are currently stationed at the outer wall with a contingent of soldiers bolstering our defenses," said Fong. Toph tapped her finger on the table once. Truth. Aang felt some tension leave his shoulders. At least he wouldn't have to fight to convince anyone of the war's existence this time around. "So you really don't know what happened to the Earth King after he stepped down?" Zuko asked. "We don't," said one of the other generals, a man with a fierce gaze and an iron-plated headband that made him look even sterner. "Unfortunately." Toph again tapped once. "But we must ask, how did you come across this information?" "Bumi is my friend," Aang said. The words came to him easily. "He told us what happened before he went into hiding again. We have no idea where he is anymore, either." The lie came easily, too. "I see," said General Fong, stroking his beard. "Have you come here to help in the war effort, Avatar?" Something like greed glinted in his eyes. In this world, Aang had not unleashed his rage on a fleet of enemy ships, so Fong had no reason to covet the power of the Avatar state yet. It wasn't as overt, it seemed, but his desire for Aang's power was still there. That was just fine by Aang. It meant they'd want to keep him around. "Yes," he replied, nodding. He wove his fingers together as he considered his words. But first, he had to make sure he could trust them with his information. To the day he left his world, Aang and his friends still didn't know how Azula found out about the solar eclipse. They assumed she had learned from the Dai Li, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. "Who is involved in the leadership of this city now that the king is gone?" One of the other generals answered, rubbing his long mustache between his fingers. "The Council of 5 oversees the military and the ministry handles all other matters of state. There's a Minister of Coin, Minister of Infrastructure, Minister of Civic Affairs, and the Grand Secretariat that oversees them all, and the Dai Li." Toph tapped once. "And why aren't they here?" Aang asked. He wanted to see this Grand Secretariat for himself. If they were anything like Long Feng, he planned to leave Ba Sing Se behind and never look back. "The Grand Secretariat is too busy with other matters to involve herself with a war meeting," Fong replied. Toph drummed her fingers on the table twice. "A lie." "I see," said Aang. He decided then that he best not mention the lunar eclipse yet. He lay his palms flat against the table. "Well then. I have reason to assume that the Water Nation is planning an assault on the city as we speak." He took a gamble here and he knew it. His only evidence for this was that Azula did the same in his world with the drill, and then a quiet infiltration after that. He wondered if Princess Katara would do the same. His heart hurt just from thinking about the possibility of it. He both yearned for and reviled the idea of crossing paths with her again. Did she have it in her to invade Ba Sing Se? He hated to admit it to himself, but he didn't know her in this world. Didn't know what she was capable of. But now that Sokka was back with her, there was a strong possibility he would be the one coming up with the strategy for it. Even in this world, Sokka was capable of that sort of thing. He pushed both of them from his mind. "Impossible," said one of the other generals, scoffing. "We patrol the coasts of Ba Sing Se daily. The bulk of our navy keeps all of Westlake safe from here to Full Moon Bay. We haven't seen any movement from the water navy in recent days to suggest an impending assault. Can you tell us anything about this attack?" Fong asked. His tone was so inviting it almost seemed condescending, like talking to a child. "Where it's coming from, when they plan to invade. I assume by nightfall, but they have been known to attack during the day if it suited them." Aang looked away, clenching his teeth. "No. Fong let out a short breath. I see. Well, we'll continue to patrol the outer wall, as we always do. Zuko spoke up next, arms crossed. What about the people outside of your walls? In all our time in the Earth Kingdom we've barely seen outposts of soldiers anywhere. It's as if you abandoned the war effort and just holed yourselves up in here waiting for the Water Nation to invade. His voice was hard, his tone accusing. Aang thought he saw a bit of his Zuko in there. He could easily imagine the scar over his left eye. You presume too much, said the general with the long mustache, scowling. With Omashu and Jailing fallen years ago, our forces are spread only to strategic points throughout the Earth Kingdom and away from its shores. Ba Sing Se is our capital, and its proximity to the sea requires the bulk of our defense to stay here. The general in the headband slammed his fist against the table. Why are you defending yourself to a child? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Muku, these children are the Avatar and his companions, said Fong. They deserve our respect. Toph grinned. You said it. Even so, the fighting is fiercest in the Fire Nation, Zuko continued, offering the mustachioed general a scowl equal in intensity. King Long Feng of Jiduan is contributing more to the war effort even if he's a jerk who's just trying to increase his own power in the Fire Nation. And now he's working with the Golden City. And there's even more sea they need to defend from there. I don't think I need to remind you that it's an island nation. Aang thought it best not to mention that this world's Long Feng also tried to get them to assassinate King Ki, but Zuko's words impressed him all the same. Azula smirked. Well said, brother. General Muku seemed sufficiently cowed, crossing his arms just like Zuko and averting his surly gaze. The other general twirled his mustache around his finger, deep in thought, but mumbled something to himself before speaking up. You suggest we mount an offensive, then? With what forces? What resources? It is a foolish endeavor that will end in failure. Do you think, these past 100 years, all of our predecessors haven't tried? We cannot even make it to the shores of the North or South Poles before a fleet of water navy ships wipes out our own. Not to mention their icy landscape that puts our earthbenders at a severe disadvantage. Azula scoffed. So, what? Like my brother said, you're going to sit here behind your walls like cowards? You might as well just surrender and save yourself the trouble. Muku slammed his fist against the table again. You speak out of line. I speak the truth, said Azula, unflinching. Aang sat and listened, wondering if he should intervene or not. Have you considered other avenues of invasion? The sky, perhaps. You may not have been paying attention, but we are earthbenders, Muku responded, glowering. We cannot fly. Then overcome that limitation, Azula shot back. Surely your people can put their minds to work and invent something. A flying ship, perhaps. Fong laughed, a deep bellowing guffaw that made the table rumble. You speak as if something like that is easy. I've never heard of such a thing. This is a war room, not a place for childish fancies, Muku grumbled. Aang cleared his throat. He wondered where Azula came up with the idea but decided he would press her for the details later. It doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere, he said, pushing his chair back and standing. But if possible, I'd like to stay here in Ba Sing Se for a while. Maybe it'll give us time to come up with more ideas. He also wanted to find out more about this Grand Secretariat, or see if he could learn anything about Bumi or Ki. Of course, we'd be honored to continue hosting the Avatar, said Fong, also standing. He gave a significant look to the other generals. General Falan, General Muku, don't you agree? Falan stood and bowed respectfully while Muku just grumbled and they both departed. Finally, Toph mumbled so Fong couldn't hear her. This was boring and those blockheads were getting on my nerves. Fong gestured for them to walk out the door first. I've even taken the liberty of preparing your living quarters as a guest of honor in the upper ring. One of the guards will escort you there. Thank you, Fong, Aang said, bowing. As they left and started walking down the halls to exit the palace, a soldier rushed up to Fong and bowed quickly before speaking. General, sir. A fleet of water navy ships have been spotted approaching from East Lake. They're headed to Sanctuary Gate. Sanctuary Gate? But how? Fong stared at Aang, eyes wide and mouth gaping, but promptly composed himself and administered orders to the soldier. Prepare the battlements. Focus all of our defenses on the city port. He turned back to Aang, his hands folded behind his back. Avatar Aang, might I? We'll help, Aang said before he could finish. He wasn't sure whether he should grin in accomplishment for successfully predicting the attack or not. I'll fly there on Appa and start fighting. Likely, he assumed, against Sokka and Katara. Not alone, you're not, Azula said. I'm coming with you. You're going to need me if you freeze up against the princess again. We're all coming, Toph said, clenching her fist. I want another chance to knock their heads in. Good luck, Avatar, said Fong. Our forces will be right behind you. I don't like this, Sokka said, arms crossed as they waited under the massive outer walls of the city. A tiny settlement sat right outside the walls on rocky crags, a hidden cave with a dingy port and ferry ships in various states of disrepair. Supposedly, a sister port called Full Moon Bay, oh, the irony, he thought, nestled on the other side of the Serpent's Pass to ferry refugees to Ba Sing Se. They called this place Sanctuary Gate, the final stop for refugees before they were allowed access to the city. It was something of a customs office, but over time ramshackle homes built up around the gate due to the amount of time it took for some people to be allowed entry. How are we supposed to get inside without the right paperwork? Be patient, brother, said Katara. Her eyes passed over the men and women in black clothing that patrolled the sanctuary gate, but then turned back to Sokka. We won't need paperwork. Gashiun has us covered. Sokka lowered his voice again as he eyed the sandbender standing in line with Suki and Yu some distance away, waiting to see the customs officers. I still don't see why you trust him. He's willing to do whatever it takes to be reunited with his sister, she said. I can relate. She let those words sink into his head for a moment before continuing. I mentioned earlier that his sister lives in the city. She's a member of the Dai Li, which is something like a police force. When she was still in training, they used to meet in secret beneath the city. She lowered her voice to a whisper. There's a huge network of catacombs deep underground, accessible even from here. That's how our people will get in, underwater tunnels that lead into the catacombs. And Gashiun is the only one who can navigate them for us. But how? He cut himself off as one of the black-clothed guards patrolled near, then continued when she was safely away from them. How are our people supposed to get to those tunnels? The city's full of earthbenders, they'll just collapse them as soon as they find out we're in there. They won't know, Katara whispered back. While our fleet attacks from above the water, a hidden force of submarines will get into the tunnels from under it. She grinned and grabbed his wrists. Don't you see, Sokka? Your inventions and my connections, together. It's perfect. While they infiltrate the city that way, the five of us will go in like any other refugee, coordinating above and below. He stared at Gashiun again, whose arms crossed in silence while Suki and Yu chattered around him about something Sokka couldn't hear. How do you know him, anyway? Katara let go of him and took a step back. We met 2 years ago, she answered. In my travels when I left to study healing at the North Pole. She put a hand on her chest and smiled, a picture of innocence that only Sokka knew as an act. Suki and I, took a bit of a detour from my route and went into the Earth Kingdom in secret. We met Gashiun at a desert oasis and became friends and stayed in touch. It was right around that time where he lost contact with his sister, too. He hasn't heard from her since. Sokka scoffed. Of course she would leave her royal procession behind to go off exploring. Father would have been furious if he knew. Friends, huh? Oh, please, she snapped at him. Don't get any funny ideas. I just saw the value in having someone like him around. But he's still a... Sokka got cut off by bells ringing in alarm at the top of the sanctuary gates. Refugees gathered their families close as soldiers and guards rushed to their stations. Water Tribe. A soldier announced. Just offshore. One of the guards, a woman with raven-colored hair to match her clothes, started to organize the crowds, but Sokka thought she didn't show much enthusiasm about it. All right, people. Don't panic. Move along. Suki, Yu, and Gashiun rushed over to them and Katara put on the facade of a frightened refugee. Okay, stay together, everyone. We'll get through this. They looked out over the water, spotting distant sails emblazoned with the emblem of the Water Nation. The invasion had begun. Aang sat at the back of Appa's saddle, his shoulders tense as he prepared himself for the possibility of seeing Katara again. Azula sat with him, one arm draped over her knee while Toph clutched the other side of the saddle and Zuko sat at Appa's reins. The poor bison needed a rest. Going back and forth between the palace and the outer walls was a long trip that took its toll. How'd you come up with the idea for an airship? Aang asked her. He absent-mindedly pet Sabi's head as he thought back to the last time they spoke together. Was it that spirit that's inside of you, like the ones in Zuko and Toph? The guru in the mountains, Shen, told them the one inside Azula was a malevolent force, but Aang knew nothing about how to get rid of it. He had never heard of such a thing. As far as he knew, spirits had never bonded with humans before. I don't know, she admitted. It came to me in a dream, I suppose. Silly, right? I saw these enormous balloons and giant, floating black metal ships. There's no way metal monstrosities like those could fly. Aang frowned. You dreamt about my world. But how? What kinds of spirits are inside you guys? And why isn't there something in me? Is it because I'm the Avatar? I have to figure out how to get them out before you all get hurt. Though a small part inside of him stirred, wondering if he did, indeed, have something he carried with him, too. Toph shrugged. I don't know. I've been okay with mine so far, it's stayed pretty quiet. Unfortunately we don't have time to deliberate this further, Azula said, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. I'll be fine for now. Aang sighed. If they weren't concerned yet, then he figured it wasn't something worth worrying over at this point. Hopefully there'd be time to help them later, especially if whatever spirits ailing them were the cause of Zuko and Azula's strange behavior over the past several days. Get ready, guys, Zuko called to them, peering over the map they'd been given. We're almost to the outer wall. And Sanctuary Gate should be here. Sounds of battle rang in the distance even before they crested the wall. But as soon as they reached the other side Aang shrugged Sabi off his shoulders and leapt off the saddle, glider in hand. The water navy had frozen over the whole bay, and even from the sky he saw spots in the ice stained red with blood. Chapter 13, Sanctuary Gate. Aang, hold still. He couldn't. The pain lanced through his left shoulder and even though he tried so hard not to move it continued to spasm through him. The arrow had sunk deeper into him when they fought to escape from the ambush, his every movement jostling it further and further in his flesh. His blood soaked through his clothes as they fled, his breath short and ragged and he burned with the thought that the arrow could have been poisoned. The team had managed to find relative safety in a ruined temple and Katara went to work, commanding him to bite down on a wad of cloth. She tore away his sleeve and cleaned some of the blood, her gaze set with grim determination while he did all he could not to cry. He dimly registered Toph using earthbending to hold down his arms and legs. I don't think it's poisoned, she said. But I'm glad you had the good sense not to try to pull it out. A distant part of his mind thought that a shame. Perhaps if he edged closer to death the Avatar state might actually make an appearance to stop it. She did it without warning. Agony ripped through his shoulder and down his arm and he convulsed as much as he could despite his limited movement. Katara used bending, blood bending, to staunch the wound as the arrow clattered to the ground. Her hands glowed with healing power, digging deep into his wound. He gulped in deep breaths in an attempt to calm himself, his vision blurry with tears and clothes clinging to him in sweat. He pulled his other arm free of the earth once he trusted himself not to flinch away just so he wouldn't feel so trapped. Sorry that hurt so much, Katara said to him, eyes still fixed on the wound. Pain continued to throb through his arm and chest but he could already feel her efforts to soothe it. A wound like this is new to me. Lightning hurt more, he grunted out. The cloth must have fallen from his mouth. He must have screamed, too, his throat felt raw. Don't know how you do it, sweetness, Toph chimed. Aang assumed that Zuko, Sokka, and Suki were off ensuring their safety. Gotta give you tons of credit. That almost made me sick. Give Aang credit, too. He was really brave through it. She smiled at him, and for a moment all the pain went away. How'd you blood bend? It's not a full moon, he managed to say. He regretted his words when they made her smile fall from her face. It's easy when the blood is on the outside, she said, returning her full attention to his care. It's not like I was doing it to control you. Teach me how to heal, he said after a moment. Healing was one of the many bending secrets he never had the chance to learn. She scoffed. What, between all your other training? And us constantly moving? I'll manage. If I teach you how to heal then you won't need me anymore, she said, a hint of a joke in her tone. Crazy talk, he mumbled. His eyelids started to feel heavy, he must have lost more blood than he'd thought. I'll always need you. Toph stood, jerking a thumb toward the ruins of an archway that used to be a door. I'm gonna get going before I vomit for real. Katara found bandages in her pack and wrapped his shoulder in a soft laugh and his arm in a smile that made the pain dim even more. The inside of the wound is going to need healing again before I seal the whole thing up, but you'll be okay. You need to rest now. I'll learn how, whatever it takes. His head swam. He didn't even realize that she gently pushed him down to his sleeping role. Saifu Katara. 12 water navy ships. Just 12, and they had already caused so much damage. Aang fell onto the ice covering the harbor, staff swinging at a mass of soldiers that roared toward the docks. His blast sent them sliding across the ice and snow, but a pair escaped his onslaught and rushed him with club and machete. Aang drew the meteorite sword in his other hand and slapped their attacks away, attacking them with fire-bending once he forced an opening. 12 water navy ships. A field of ice spanning the harbor. Their numbers were few, but their tactics made up for it. Unfortunately, right now, Ba Sing Se's forces numbered even fewer. The ice under Aang's feet melted and tried to drag him into the sea, but he leapt out of its reach and swept the offending waterbender off balance, cutting through his defenses with an airbending empowered sword. He tried to think about what to do regarding the ships, but they gleamed with a coating of ice. Burning them wasn't an option. People screamed somewhere behind him. Refugees clamored to get through the sanctuary gate as Water Tribe soldiers encroached from the ice and a handful of Earth Kingdom guards and soldiers fought back against them. Anger bubbled up in his stomach at the sight. Why aren't they letting the refugees through? Wind whistled at Aang's back and he heard a grunt followed by the sound of a body falling into the snow. He turned just in time to see the life leave his would-be attacker and a lithe figure in black clothing appear as if from the water. Watch your back, Avatar, said his rescuer. With her pin-straight black hair tied back and a mask over her mouth, it took Aang a moment to recognize her. My! He exclaimed. What are you doing here? Not an enemy in this world, he had to tell himself. Back in the Fire Nation, she led a group called the Roku Warriors. And then it clicked, didn't Suki and the Kyoshi Warriors take a guard duty job in Ba Sing Se in his world? I'll explain later, she replied, as unwavering as always. Cover me. I risked my butt coming out here on the ice to save yours. She hurled a sling that wrapped around another approaching soldier's ankles and floored him, which Aang followed up with a blast of air that forced the soldier to slide across the ice. They hurried back toward the docks with footing as careful as they could manage. We have to get the refugees through the gate, he said. If we don't, this'll be a slaughter. I know, Mai replied, arms crossed protectively so that her knives framed her face. But it requires earthbending and the soldiers won't open it, even if I order them. Aang grit his teeth. I'll make them. By this point, Appa had dropped off the others and joined the fray himself, swiping his tail at a cluster of Water Navy soldiers and blasting them away from the docks. Toph pulled up a stone wall to give them some space, dislodging the ice and snow from the docks. Aang saw more of the Roku warriors forming a blockade of their own, ducking and weaving behind shanties and buildings to assault their enemies from the shadows. Any sign of the princess and friends? Azula asked, tugging on her leather bracers. She has to be here, doesn't she? Aang shook his head. Zuko pulled his swords out of their scabbard and noticed Mai at Aang's side, his eyes widening. What? Mai. Took you long enough to notice me, she said. Keep up with your training. He shook his head, as if to clear any doubts that she stood in front of him. Yeah, I have. Guys, we don't have time, Aang urged them. Listen. I should have expected the Avatar to be here. Ice gripped Aang's stomach when he heard the voice. Her voice. He took a deep breath and turned to face her, spotting the speaker on top of Topha's earthen wall. She wore the clothing of an Earth Kingdom peasant, but it was unmistakably Katara. He readied his staff. Toph, I need you to get that gate open. Help the refugees through. Force it if you must, he ordered, eyes fixed on Katara. She stood with arms crossed, looking over them with vague interest. Another girl, he realized, stood next to her. Zuko, you two keep fighting the soldiers. Azula. Azula cut him off. I'm staying right here. She stood at his side and settled into a fire-bending stance. He nodded as their friends ran off to do as he bid them. I was gonna say that. Giving me a real fight this time, Avatar? Katara asked. What a surprise. I thought airbenders just loved running away. He answered by stomping his foot, shattering the wall she stood upon and shooting the rocks at her. Katara leapt back into the sea, water swirling around her. Whips lashed out at Aang and Azula, but together they summoned fire into being that was hot enough to turn her water to steam. Azula's flames, Aang noticed, burned blue. He frowned at Azula. Remember what I told you. I know, she said under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear. I won't kill her. She swiped orange flames at Katara, launching herself at the princess before Aang could. Aang found himself thankful for that. He switched his target to Yu, who had not avoided his initial attack but recovered already, swinging her heavy blade at him. He blocked with his own sword just in time, surprised at the strength behind the blow. You're a sword fighter? She asked, blinking her wide blue eyes. I wouldn't have expected you to use a weapon like this. Aang scoffed as they traded blows, but took to dodging rather than blocking because of the painful vibrations shooting up and down his arm. He thought she seemed remarkably unconcerned about the fighting all around them. No kidding. I had the same thought. Without bending, he was no match for her, so he jumped out of her range to end it quickly with earthbending. Yu was faster than he expected and pounced, getting within his defenses and striking him with the hilt of her blade. The strike to his gut had him doubled over, allowing her to grab him by the hair. He managed to force her knee down, sinking her leg into the ground before she could bash him in the head with it, stunning her enough to let go of him. She tried swiping with her sword, but her trapped foot caused her to be thrown off balance enough that he had time to cover his hand in rocks and grasp the blade that way, ripping it from her hands and sinking her deeper into the dirt. He threw aside her sword. You've got such a sad look on your face, she said, once again showing a surprising lack of distress about the situation and her loss. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Well, He fumbled over his words, at a loss for what to say in response to that. He never spoke to you much in the short time he knew her. I'll try to smile more. Aang. Azula's shout saved him from responding. Stop fooling around and get over here. With a harbor full of water and ice behind her, Katara had Azula on the ropes. Azula stayed light on her feet, weaving between Katara's attacks and responding with jets of red and orange. But Katara danced, stepping over the ice that had glazed the harbor with all the grace of the same Katara he knew. Shimmering discs floated to her hands and sliced toward Azula, which she managed to break just in time with flame-empowered kicks which Katara in turn absorbed with water and rain. Aang leapt into the fray after shaking away the thought of helping Katara instead, adding his flames to Azula's own. Nice of you to join us, Katara said in the same breath that frost kissed her fingers. Aang couldn't bring himself to reply. Tiny, harsh pinpricks of cold rolled over his skin that chilled to his bone. Where's your dear brother? Azula asked her, juggling a fireball before hurling it at Katara. I owe him for ditching us. Where's yours? Katara shot back. I owe him for leaving this little present. She pointed at her face, where Aang spotted a tiny burn under her left eye that looked like a crescent moon. He'd thought it was an eye bag at first. It's going to leave a scar. Back home, Katara couldn't heal scars, either. His body in that world carried all sorts of them. How about another one to match? Azula asked. She took a stance to shoot fire from her fingertips, but she froze in place, her eyes wide. What? Why can't I move? Aang's stomach dropped. He recognized that look, the fear in her eyes and the quivering of limbs as she tried to fight back against the force acting on her. Blood-bending. He whispered. Azula's arm swung toward Aang, a marionette dancing on her master's strings. Aang. What's happening? Her face set into a grimace as she tried resisting, but Aang dodged between her blows. A hand with fingernails like claws swiped at his face, but he blocked her arm with his, buffeting her away with a harmless gust of wind. He looked to the waterbender dancing on the ice, her hands held up with fingers splayed. Katara. Stop this. You can't tell me what to do, Avatar, she informed him with all the self-assuredness he knew and normally loved. He found himself horrified by the view this time, her puppetry framed by the night sky and the moon behind her. The half-moon. Toph didn't know when things got to a point where she obeyed Aang's requests without any protest. She wanted a rematch with Katara, but part of her accepted it wasn't time for that yet. Before meeting the Avatar, the only person in her life she ever respected that much had been Jet. But Jet manipulated her. Confused her. Used her strength and her friendship to his advantage. Molded her the way he wanted and danced with words that somehow rang true but tasted as sweet as blasting jelly. She'd been blind to it for years until Aang came and changed all that. Aang had his own secrets, but now that she knew them he'd been as honest and direct with her as any earthbender. His story of another life was hard to believe, and unless he had completely deluded himself she knew it had to be true, perhaps better than anyone else. The spirit she'd somehow picked up quelled all doubts of that. She'd realized that the same spirit had nudged her to accept Sokka's help when he found her unconscious on the road, collapsed from the oppressive heat. Toph didn't want to make a habit of listening to strange voices and feelings in her head, but part of her found that she liked it. It felt like an old friend, stable and direct and comforting. Stop dilly-dallying and take down that wall. Uncountable panicked refugees pushed against a line of earthbender guards in front of Sanctuary Gate, a cacophony of stomping feet that sent her senses into a tizzy. Families hugged each other close, cowering in fear away from the encroaching tide of the water navy. Light-footed, knife-throwing warriors who worked with the Lady Zuko did most of the fighting, but she knew they were outnumbered. There was no chance the earthbender guards or their hired help would win this fight. And yet the gate guards refused to let the people through. Throughout the din, Toph heard a little girl sobbing into her parents' silks as all three huddled together. They held on to each other, the father whispering lies to them about how they'd get out of this unharmed. That they'd go back home and drink tea and walk among their gardens and everything would be okay. The girl dropped her doll to the ground, its porcelain head shattering to pieces. She had to help them or there'd be a massacre. Toph stomped her feet, rising up on a rock pillar higher than anyone else in the crowd. Hey, dunderheads! Let these people through or face my wrath. She stomped again for good measure, shaking the earth and commanding the whole crowd's attention. Not without the proper clearance. A guard replied, his voice gravelly and hard. We cannot allow these refugees. So you're just gonna let them all die? She shouted back. What kind of soldiers are you? She stepped forward, the ground rising to meet her as she lowered back to their level, the crowd parting for her. The guard held up a hand, a gesture for her to stop. We've been ordered to keep these gates shut. And I order otherwise. Toph pushed him aside with barely any effort, rage burning in her belly. How could people of Ba Sing Se stand for this? How could the Council of Five allow this? The guard found his feet quickly, taking an earthbending stance. Stop. Stand down or face the consequences. The people in the crowd had other ideas, bum-rushing him before he could retaliate against Toph. Let us through. Save us, please. We have children with us. More guards rushed to the aid of their own, shouting and fighting against the throng of bodies. Some guards helped the people, but many helped their own. People jostled against Toph, then pushed harder, elbows and shoulders digging into her as their desperation mounted. Hey! Wait! She shouted, but no one heard, and the stomping feet and anguished shouts and rapid pumping hearts combined to overwhelm her senses until all she knew was the cold hard stone pressed against her cheek. She thought for a moment that she had fallen and she'd be trampled, but she'd been flattened against the ornate carved lattice work of the sanctuary gate instead. But the earth was her anchor, her strength. She clutched it in her hands and pushed, thinking of the porcelain doll that shattered and the one she knew in her childhood. The rumbling gave her back her sight and she sensed the width of the wall as it crumbled to dust. Head bowed and hands outstretched, she destroyed the wall and smiled when she felt the cool air of the night beyond it. She stood in place as the refugees ran to safety, to sanctuary, and now they all gave her a wide berth. Some even cried out their thanks to her, but so many rushed by her that she couldn't even form a picture of them all. "I'm gonna give your top brass a piece of my mind next time I see them," she said to the guards who stayed behind without turning to face them. They stood in silence, cowed, and part of her wanted them to drown in their shame. But the other part, the bit of freedom fighter that lingered in her, spoke instead. "Get out there and fight back, all of you. Show the water tribes that they can't take this city from us." Aang gasped, his chest pumping in short breaths as if the winds he weaved decided to leave his lungs behind. How are you doing this?" A dark smile graced Katara's features and for the first time it hit Aang. This wasn't Katara. Not the Katara he knew. She would never revel in something like this, forcing her control over another no matter how much power it gave her. As she dragged Azula toward him again, he hurtled toward Katara with wind and fire spinning in his hand. Just when he was about to hit her, his outstretched fist jerked from his target and slammed into the ice beneath him and cracks spider-webbed under their feet. She had grabbed control of his arm, but he followed the movement and somersaulted forward, coming down with a kick that slammed her with a vortex from above. Katara's body smacked against the ice and he felt movement return to his right hand. Azula fell to her knees, her strings cut. Aang was about to continue the attack when a horn bellowed from somewhere behind him. He whirled around to look, spotting the sanctuary gate collapse and crowds of refugees flooding through to safety beyond. At the same time, Earth Kingdom soldiers from other parts of the outer wall reached the harbor, mounting a defense against the water navy with catapults that took down 3 of their ships. Katara stood. "Well, seems like Ba Sing Se managed to rally enough of a counter-attack today," she noted. "That's my cue to leave, I suppose." Aang narrowed his eyes. "What was your purpose in coming here today? Why such a small fleet?" "I thought I'd try my hand at raiding the city for the first time," she replied, shrugging. "And the Navy would never give me command of more than this many ships. I'm only a woman, you know. But this was fun. Thanks for the learning experience, Avatar." She smiled, but before he could reply she sunk through the ice and vanished to the sea below. Once again, he cursed his inability to waterbend well enough to follow her. "I can't believe she didn't even stick to her own plan." Suki shrugged, edging closer to him while the guards patrolled past. "Give her a break, Sokka." She saw the Avatar and wanted another chance to fight. Sokka shushed her. "Don't use that name. Stick with what we all decided." They stood now on a dirt road among nearly 100 refugees as Earth Kingdom soldiers tried to re-establish order and quell their panic. They'd made it through the sanctuary gate, melting among the crowd once the walls fell and the people escaped through the gap. Sokka had recognized the Avatar's companion Toph as the one who allowed them all through, but he slunk past her and hoped she didn't notice. He wondered, briefly, what the Avatar wanted in Ba Sing Se, but there was no time for that now. Katara and you were supposed to come with them. Instead, Sokka found himself only with Suki and Gashiun, the Sandbender. Not a turn of events he would have preferred, leave it to his hot-headed sister to screw things up somehow. "I am not calling you Boulder," Suki said. "You know, for someone who's supposedly really creative you came up with a stupid alias. Says the one who picked the name Song. You don't look like a Song." She put her hands on her hips. "I think it's a really pretty name." Gashiun, now without his goggles, rolled his eyes. "Can't you guys save it for later?" Sokka crossed his arms. "So now what do we do?" "The plan's still on," Suki told him. "Instead of being up here with us, they're just down there." She pointed at the ground, toward the hidden network of tunnels that snaked all throughout the city, according to Gashiun. "We just have to figure out a way to coordinate with them." Too much relied on Gashiun for Sokka's liking. He found himself staring at the Sandbender, who noticed and glared back at Sokka before crossing his arms and looking away. A customs officer who looked quite disgruntled about having to leave her desk behind at Sanctuary Gate approached them. She held a piece of paper that she struggled to write on without anything to support it. Names. I'm Song, and this is my boyfriend Tseng. Suki said, hooking her arm in Sokka's. Sokka held back a groan. Yep, just a couple. Whose names sound really similar. Yeah, we hear that a lot. And this is our friend Gashiun, she continued, gesturing to the sandbender. The officer scrawled away but poked a hole in her paper with her pen. Right. Intended address. Lower Ring, East Block. Paper Lantern Neighborhood, Gashiun said. I can't believe they're letting everyone through all at once, the officer moaned once she made another hole and the action made her drop her inkwell, staining the earth black. How am I supposed to keep track of all of you, huh? There are ways this should be done. She threw her arms up in the air, her paper crinkling in her grip. I think you need a bit of a break, lady, Suki said, trying to calm her. You seem a little stressed. Of course I'm stressed. She squeezed her pen so hard it broke. There was just an attack. And I had to leave my favorite stamps behind. There's no organization to anything right now. She stomped off, mumbling something about getting a new pen. She kind of reminds me of you when you get all high-strung, Suki said to Sokka, eyebrow raised in amusement. He scoffed. Ha ha. Now let's go, we have a lot of walking to do before we get to the lower ring. The sun passed its zenith in the sky by the time they arrived back at the upper ring the following day. All of them except for Zuko, oddly enough, maintained sour moods. Aang supposed Mai might have been another exception but it was hard to tell what she felt. She'd joined them atop Appa without saying a word and Aang didn't feel a need to say anything about it, either. They'd flown back to the upper ring after the battle, staying only long enough to ensure the Water Navy's retreat. The Sanctuary Gate had been shut again once the refugees all made it through, with the Ministry of Civic Affairs working through the night to get them all settled into the city. That development had surprised Aang, but he supposed the city owed them at least that much after what Toph had told him about the confrontation at the gate. What are you doing all the way here, Mai? Is your island okay? Zuko sat in silence most of the flight back, giving his friends an opportunity to rest. But Aang knew he burned with questions for the Roku warrior the whole way and finally opened his mouth once they passed the walls that enclosed the upper ring. Crescent Island's fine, she responded. We started getting some support from the Golden City. She sat with her legs folded, tinkering with the knife holsters she kept around her wrists. Aang wondered if that support meant she had met Ty Lee. I got bored after that, you know. She looked up at him with the hint of a smile. After you first told me about all your adventures I figured it was time we got out here, too. Yet you became a simple fairy guard, said Azula, sitting cross-legged and surly. She flexed her arms and fingers as if still ruminating over their betrayal. Quite a step down from esteemed warriors founded by an avatar to protect his home. Zuko scowled at her. Azula. Mai shrugged. I never said this wasn't boring, too. But my men and women all decided to help any way we could. And this was where we were needed. Do you guys always keep that gate closed when the Water Navy's invading? Toph asked, crossing her arms. She propped herself up between two bedrolls, kicking her feet up on a third. Sabi kept trying to play with her but kept her distance. Mai frowned. That had nothing to do with us. I'm coming with you guys to the city to talk to someone about that, and other things. Appa landed in the palace's outer pavilion again, but an official in olive green robes guided them to their new dwelling. Aang was too tired to protest that and looked forward only to getting a couple hours rest after their constant flying and fighting. The official led them to an expansive home situated aside a topiary garden and koi ponds. The inside of the home felt similar to what he remembered of the one from his world, with a wide-open entrance hall and a short flight of stairs leading to an upper level with a tea table. A short, round dining table sat in the center of the hall with cream-colored cushions for seating. Drapes the color of autumn leaves let in light from windows that overlooked the gardens beyond and the lacquered cherry-wood patio behind the house. Sliding doors led to the other rooms, presumably their bedchambers. Aang smelled something woody and a little earthy that might have been ginseng. Home sweet home, I guess, he said, once they all got a good look around. The official left them after assuring they could ask for anything they needed. Aang only wanted a place for Appa to rest in the open and close enough that he was never out of their sight. "How long do we plan to stay here?" Azula asked him. "We still haven't told them about." "I know," Aang said. "The lunar eclipse. I'll figure out what we're doing soon." "It'd be nice if you stayed here for a little bit," Mai said. "I got a little bit of an idea for how Zuko progressed back at the gate, but the fire bending is new. I hope it doesn't mean you forgot what I taught you." Zuko rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, you missed a lot." He fished in his belt pocket for one of the throwing daggers he treasured for nearly the entirety of their journey. "And I haven't slacked a single day." A thought came to Aang. "My, what sort of things do the Roku warriors specialize in, again?" She dug her hands into her pockets as she considered his question. "Spying, infiltration. Fighting at a distance where it's safest for us." "Why do you ask?" "I might need your help," he said. "From all of you." Someone knocked on their front door. Aang instinctively looked to Toph, who shrugged. "I dunno who it is," she said. He walked to the door and pulled it open, coming face to face with an oddly familiar old woman in deep green robes bordered in black. She smelled strongly of incense and sweet peach and jasmine perfume, her hair pulled back into a tight, gray bun, though a few hairs had fallen out of place presumably in her rush to get there. Her eyes had been caked in blue mascara and her cheeks powdered. "Hello, Avatar Aang," she said, offering a quick bow. "I am Grand Secretariat Wu." Aang recognized her with a start and had to stop himself from exclaiming her identity in his world. She was the fortune teller. Aunt Wu, the villagers called her. Back in his world, after visiting her village for the first time, he never saw her again and frankly hadn't even thought about her in years. He wondered what sequence of events brought a simple village mystic to one of the highest offices in Ba Sing Se in place of Long Feng. His next thought, absurdly, was if she still peddled fortunes and futures and if she would do a reading for him. Mai found words for him when he faltered a second too long to come up with a reply. "You honor us, Grand Secretariat," she said. Her voice never rose among her usual monotone, but Aang picked up the practiced ease she displayed in her bow and polite smile. "Please, come inside and share some tea." She nodded to Zuko, who took it as a request to start brewing and departed to the back of the house for the water pump. Wu shook her head and stepped through the doorway. "No, you have it the wrong way around. I would love some tea, but first I must thank you all for your heroics at the sanctuary gate. I fear we would have lost a lot more if you had not been present." "The Roku warriors did a lot of the work," said Zuko as he returned and rummaged through a wooden cupboard in the corner for tea leaves, a kettle, and mugs. Painted spring flowers coiled around the white porcelain of the teapot. "And we would have lost a lot less if you just opened the gates for those people," Toph interjected, her bangs covering her eyes in such a way that she looked more imposing than ever. "All those people came to Ba Sing Se for safety and you shut them out like vermin." Wu seemed taken aback by her directness but composed herself quickly. "It was a truly regrettable circumstance and one I had no part in, I assure you. I command the Dai Li and the various ministries, not the military." "The secret police, you mean?" Aang said. He didn't know why he said it, perhaps it was Toph's anger that radiated and influenced him. She was right to be angry. Instead of looking at Wu, he focused on Zuko as he used fire bending to heat the kettle. "I thought they had their hands in everything around here." Mai stiffened and glanced at him with barely perceptible alarm shown only by the slight movement of her hand. He wondered if she concealed a weapon in her palm or if it was just a reflex from being in a potentially dangerous situation. "The Avatar means no disrespect," she said to Wu, her voice careful and measured. "We're simply tired from the battle." "Oh, no, I think he did," said Azula, sitting down on one of the cushions and folding one leg over the other. "Zuzu, pour me a cup, would you?" Wu folded her hands together beneath the billowing wide sleeves of her robes and sighed. "No offense taken. 5 years ago, the Dai Li under Long Feng were corrupt, but once I was chosen to take his office I worked to root it out from its core. My work is not yet done, but I have made significant strides in going back to our original objective from the time of Avatar Kyoshi, to protect the cultural heritage of Ba Sing Se." Aang didn't need verification from Toph to sense the truthfulness in her voice. He nodded to Wu and took a seat at the table, taking a page out of Mai's book and inviting her to join them. I understand, he said. Please, come sit with us. Toph didn't budge. Is that why there are half a dozen men standing around outside watching us? Aang froze again and glanced at Wu, who had sat down, perfectly at ease, and already started drinking her tea. She smiled after placing the teacup back down on the table. The Daily accompany me everywhere. It's for my own protection, though honestly at times like this it does get somewhat suffocating. Still, it is a requirement. You may be the Avatar and his friends, but we still do not know each other, and from my understanding Long Feng has antagonized you in the past. Trust needs to be established on both sides, especially in a city such as this one. Aang almost scoffed. If only she knew how much of an understatement that was. Azula drummed her fingers on the table as she sipped her tea. What can you offer us, then, so that we trust you? Honesty and transparency, she replied. Hospitality and protection. And most importantly, advice. The only way to last long enough in this city to make a difference is to consider your words carefully. The black widow mantis hunts with one claw but devours its prey by subduing it with the other four. What kind of proverb is that? Zuko asked, frowning. Black widow mantises have 6 claws. Aang sipped his tea, pondering her words as the flavor of lavender and mint warmed his insides. He hadn't realized he still felt a chill from the battle. From Katara. There was a reason we came to Ba Sing Se, he told her, finally. We need help. A lunar eclipse is coming and we want to mount an invasion against the water tribes before the arrival of the second moon. That's when waterbenders lose their power. Wu laughed. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it wasn't that. A lunar eclipse. Dear boy, after all these years of war, don't you think we've tried that? She reached into her robes and pulled out a well-worn journal, its binding thick and leathery with the inscription of a sun and moon on the front and back covers. The royal astrologers and diviners, if they can even be called that anymore, knew of the coming lunar eclipse for years. They've all been mapped out for the next decade, and let me tell you, they are more common than you'd think. I counted myself among the royal diviners before I took this office and know this to be true. Azula slammed her teacup against the table, its contents spilling out onto the table. Mai and Zuko gave her a dirty look and moved to mop it up with silk napkins. So you're telling us it's pointless? You haven't succeeded in taking advantage of waterbenders losing their power, so you're just going to give up and keep hiding behind these walls. Toph stood up, fists clenched. I agree with Spice Queen. That's the cowardly option. You sound just like the generals. Wu gently placed her teacup down and patted at her lips with a napkin. I admire your frankness, but it is a useless endeavor. Lunar eclipses last for only a period of roughly 3 hours. I will grant you that it is much longer than a solar eclipse, but it is still not enough time to cross the oceans to the north and south poles to mount an invasion, much less to take their cities. I am not a warrior or a soldier, and yet I still know that. So that's it? Zuko asked, standing and throwing his hands out wide. Sabi glided away from him, chittering in alarm from the sudden movement. You're going to give up because you think the war's already lost. Wu folded her hands in her lap and looked down at the table. As I said, I have no military experience and little say in our campaigns. But I do know that the Earth Kingdom is fractured, hope lost. Many who haven't holed themselves up behind these walls have fled to the sands of Si Wang. It's all I can do to keep this kingdom afloat, head above the water. But there are enemies within and without. Perhaps my predecessor had the right idea to flee to the Fire Nation and consolidate power there. There was a lot that Aang didn't know, but Long Feng was a constant in both worlds. No, Long Feng was thinking only of himself, he said. Wu took a deep breath and smiled at him. Indeed. She finished her tea and then stood. I have imposed on you long enough and I am sure you are tired. I am sorry to shut down your plan for an invasion, but I do wish for you to stay as a guest in our city for as long as you are able. Thank you for the visit, Grand Secretariat, Mai said, standing with her. Aang had almost forgotten Mai was there. When you are finished resting, General Feng would like to see you at the palace, said Wu. He told me as I departed that he was too busy to come down here himself. I am sure you understand. Aang nodded. His head spun with thoughts as he mulled over the conversation. I'll go. Thank you. Wu stopped before she reached the door. Oh, and one last thing, she said. In 3 days' time I will be throwing a feast in your honor, Avatar, both as a welcome to our city and a show of gratitude for defending it. She smiled. There will be much dancing and an opportunity to meet many influential persons within the city. Please dress your best. Sure thing, he said as she departed. He didn't think he even owned something that qualified as dressing his best. Toph aimed a low kick at the table leg that trembled the teacups and earned her a scolding look from Zuko. Yeah, right, like anyone from the lower ring is gonna be there. Toph, was everything she said the truth? Aang asked. He glanced out of the window but didn't see any Dai Li agents. I think so, she said. That lady was good at talking in layers, though. Huh? Zuko asked. Toph sighed and clarified. Talking in a roundabout way to avoid telling the truth or telling lies, or telling both in the same sentence. It's hard to say for sure. But the party, said Azula, clapping her hands together. Rubbing shoulders with Ba Sing Se's high society. Well, that sounds fun, at least. Coming here won't be a complete waste of time. That's it? The fact that the lunar eclipse idea was pointless doesn't bother you in the least. Zuko asked her. Of course it does, she said. But I'm not going to dwell on it, dear brother. We just have to move on to the next idea. And have contingencies in place for next time. Why don't we go back to the original plan? Zuko suggested. Aang wasn't even sure what that was at this point. His original plan was to get back home. Aang, you still need to master all the elements. Unless you think you can beat the Emperor without waterbending, we need to find you a master. Katara, he said immediately, but amended his statement right after that. Or Sokka, I guess. That evil waterbender you just fought. Mai asked. The Water Nation princess and prince. Toph held out a hand. Hold it, buddy. You still didn't master earthbending yet. Aang ignored Mai's question. Let's stay at least until that party. I want to find out more about what happened to King Bumi. 100 years ago, he was my friend. And I hope that hasn't changed. Do any of you even know the proper etiquette for a party like that? Mai asked them, putting a hand on her hip. Judging from your behavior with the Grand Secretariat, I'm guessing no. Seriously, what's wrong with all of you talking to her like that? This isn't the kind of place you can make enemies so carelessly. Aang shuffled his feet. In his world, Toph was best at that sort of thing. Toph. Don't look at me, she said. Haven't been part of the nobility since I was a really little kid. What, like it's hard? Azula asked, absent-mindedly twirling the hair in her bangs around her fingers. I can learn and master proper etiquette in no time. Mai shrugged. Azula has a chance. Maybe even Aang. She nodded her head toward Zuko and Toph. But you two are pretty hopeless. Zuko frowned. How do you know about that kind of thing? You were raised on an isolated island just like me and Azula. It still had politics, she informed him. Ceremonies, wealth. Part of my training involved learning to sit still and be polite and do as I was told. It helps with infiltration, reading your surroundings and melting into a crowd of people to become invisible. As I said, the Roku warriors don't just throw knives around. You've still got a lot to learn, Zuko. We've got 3 days, Aang said. For now, let's get some rest. I've got an appointment with General Fong to make. The submarines made it through to the network of underground catacombs without being detected. Katara found herself among them, along with Yu, instead of above ground sneaking her way into the city with Sokka, Suki, and all the refugees. It's so dark and damp down here, said Yu, standing with Katara while the soldiers disembarked from the submarines. They had found themselves in an underground shore with caverns so high that their illumination couldn't reach the ceiling. The dark pool of water seemed almost like black glass, barely rippling as the submarines bobbed at the surface. Something about it seemed unsettling, so Katara turned to her friend, noting that her white hair and bright blue eyes almost seemed luminescent in the darkness. "Sorry, she said. "I'd rather not be down here either, but I only have myself to blame. Fighting the Avatar was kind of fun, though, don't you think?" "It was," you responded, staring ahead into the tunnels connecting this cavern to the others. "And I don't mind. It is comfortable down here." Katara never understood why you enjoyed nighttime and dark places, but she supposed it was better than fearing it. "If you say so. Let's go, we need to find a cavern big enough to hold our forces and use it as our base of operations." She lifted her lantern, casting shadow on the tunnel ahead. Gashiun had mapped out what little of the tunnels he knew, and a direct route to the city, but he suspected no one alive knew the full depth and breadth of them. Katara had her work cut out for her, but the first step was complete. They had made it inside of the outer walls. You led the way, as serene as ever. "You're not worried about Sokka and Suki. I think this works out better for all of us. With Sokka handling things up above and me down here, Ba Sing Se won't stand a chance." Chapter 14, Distrust and Deliberations. Caution was never Topha's strong suit. Over time, it stopped being a trait of Aang's, too. That was why the two of them had snuck away from camp in the night to raid the fortress themselves. As soon as they arrived, Aang remembered that it was the same place where Zhao had imprisoned him once upon a time, where the Blue Spirit had rescued him. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now, with Topha's metal bending, the fortress stood no chance. She ripped through it like paper, opening the way for Aang to unleash chaos in the night. These foot soldiers stood no chance against their combined strength and skill. They were here only for revenge, to subject destruction upon them like the Fire Lord did to the rest of the Earth Kingdom, leaving this as one of the few places untouched by his fury. "Stop!" A body barreled into him. He hadn't sensed the person coming, too focused on slamming firebenders into unconsciousness, too determined to rip apart their weapons and catapults. As a reflex he circled the air around himself, throwing them off of him, but when he whirled around to face his attacker he was horrified to see the girl he loved. "Katara? What are you doing?" "Stopping you from doing something stupid," she said, picking herself up off of the ground. "This is reckless. It serves no purpose. This isn't the way to pay back everyone we've lost. What else can we do?" She had no answer for him. "Let's get out of here. Now. We'll talk about this later." Aang rubbed the sleep from his eyes as he waited in the antechamber to the war room. After meeting with Grand Secretariat Wu, he and the others collapsed into bed and he ended up sleeping far longer than he had expected to. Dusk had fallen by the time he rose and made his way to the palace with Toph and Mai in tow. Both wanted to accompany him, but he had his own reasons for bringing them along in the first place. He was determined to be a player in Ba Sing Se's messy politics this time around instead of a pawn, and he needed them for that. Toph he wanted for her lying detection skills, that much was true. But something about her was different in this world that he hadn't anticipated. She was much more driven and outspoken about combating injustice in a way that reminded him of his Katara. The Toph in his world wouldn't have cared about coming to a meeting with General Fong. This Toph demanded to come along. She paced back and forth in the antechamber, the wall lanterns making shadows dance across her face. As for Mai, there was so much he had yet to learn about her, in this world and otherwise, but she had a talent for diplomacy and plenty of experience that could be useful. He also intended to make use of her Roku warriors. She tossed a knife up in the air and caught it over and over again as they waited, sighing infrequently with boredom. The doors to the war room opened and a handful of army officers strode out, nodding to Aang and the others as they passed. An aide heralded them inside, where they found Fong seated at the strategy table with various scrolls, maps, and stone figurines scattered around him. Otherwise, the war room looked the same as the previous day, with soldiers stationed at the door rather than Dai Li once again. "Avatar Aang and friends, thank you for coming," Fong said, sweeping his arms out wide. "And most of all, I offer you my sincere thanks for your part in defending the sanctuary gate." He noticed Mai and beamed. "And you bring with you one of the esteemed Roku warriors." "Of course, where would we be without the protection of the brave men and women in your ranks?" Toph shook her fist at him. All right. Enough with the flattery. Aang wondered how long she would last before her first outburst. To his surprise, she managed to hold back from knocking down the doors while they waited outside. He shared a glance with Mai, who rolled her eyes. What was the whole deal with your soldiers blocking off the gate? The refugees were cornered there and would have died if I didn't do anything. A frown crossed Fang's face. They weren't ordered to open them. It is an unfortunate necessity, but with the attack we couldn't risk waterbenders infiltrating our walls during the attack. He ran his fingers through his beard, pausing for a moment to consider his words. You saved a lot of lives last night, but at what cost? What if some of the enemy got through? Any damage they do to our city or its people is on your hands. Toph seethed. It's worth it. I wasn't going to stand by and let those people die. I'm with Toph, Aang said without hesitating. I'll take responsibility for whatever happens. As will the Roku warriors, said Mai, surprising Aang. I plan to withdraw 6 from the sanctuary gates to work here, in the city. I hope you do not object. Something about the way she spoke to Fang and Wu seemed much different from how she spoke to her friends, and it was a side to her that Aang didn't know from his world, if that Mai even had it. Fang sighed. Very well. Toph leaned back in her chair, satisfied, and he peered over his map, eyes resting on the Fire Nation. You mentioned previous contact with King Long Feng. Might I ask how recently that was? Sometime during the summer, Aang replied, curious as to the direction of his conversation. It was something of a confrontation. I see, Fang replied. So you wouldn't be opposed to confronting him again? Aang furrowed his brow. Not if it couldn't be avoided. Why? Though he left Ba Sing Se 5 years ago and established Jiduan from a humble town, his influence continues to be felt in this city, he said. Some of the Dai Li still remain loyal to him, his eyes watching and ears listening in on our councils and ministries. He was a sneaky, ambitious man, you see, and controlled this city and our king with paper and coin and an iron fist. As an advisor to the king, Long Feng kept all knowledge of the war from him and forbade its mention within the city walls. Well, that explained the Dai Li's conspicuous absence in the war room. And the Council of 5 is of the belief that he now has the ear of Grand Secretariat Wu. You could have told the king of the war's existence yourself, you know, Aang pointed out. But you didn't. It took Bumi's intervention to do that. Fang stumbled over his words for a moment. Well, yes, we could have. Of course. But Long Feng was a powerful man who practically raised King Ki. Any words against Long Feng would have had any one of us swiftly disappearing. So we focused our efforts on the war instead. Toph kicked her feet up on the table. So what, you think this Long Feng guy is gonna try to take over Ba Sing Se again? The former King Bumi was the one who scared him off. But since we haven't seen nor heard from Bumi in these 5 years, we fear Long Feng is going to try to come back. Aang weighed his options, getting an idea of where he was going with this. If it was true and Long Feng did have Wu wrapped around his finger, that would explain her reluctance about the lunar eclipse plan. But then again, she raised a good point about it in the first place. I don't know where Bumi is. I told you that. I understand that, Fang said. But we have a request for you, Avatar. And what is that? He picked up one of the earthen figurines, one that looked oddly like a Dai Li agent, and rolled it between his fingers. Learn what you can from the Grand Secretariat. Gain her trust and report to the Council of 5 anything you learn of Long Feng or his machinations. Fine, he said, mulling it over for just a moment. He didn't know what he would learn, if anything, about Long Feng's influence. He remembered what Wu told him about the Black Widow mantis and its 5 claws, a warning about the Council of 5. We'll report anything we learn. Is there anything else you need from me today, or any other information about Wu you can offer? Fang offered a grin of triumph. That would be all, he said. Thank you, Avatar Aang. Aang told Toph and Mai to hold back their questions until they got back to the house where they could discuss everything in privacy, but as soon as they walked through the door they found Azula and Zuko waiting for them, seated around the central dining table before Toph could even open her mouth. You went to the palace? Azula asked, eyes narrowed in accusation. Why didn't you bring me? I figured you two were training, Aang said. Besides, after our talk with Fong yesterday I wasn't sure how receptive he would be to having you and Zuko around. Azula stood. What? Don't be preposterous. I may have had one little outburst, but it's no reason to exclude me from something like that. Aang put up his hands in a gesture of surrender. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to exclude you from anything. I promise. She crossed her arms and turned up her nose in an imperious way that reminded him of Princess Azula. A simple apology isn't good enough, get on your knees and beg forgiveness. Aang couldn't help but chuckle at that. Yeah, right. Zuko pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed at his sister. Let it go, Azula. What did we miss, anyway? Aang promised to spy on Wu for the council, Toph said, picking at her ear. I didn't, Aang responded quickly. Well, sort of. But I don't plan to follow through. They seem opposed to each other and I want to figure out why. I don't want to take any sides yet until we get the big picture. Spoken like an airbender trying to run away from his issues, Toph said. Aang frowned. Not really. It's more like an earthbender's approach, neutral Jing. Waiting and listening for the right moment. Toph laughed. Don't argue with your master about different kinds of Jing. But fine, point made. She pet Sabi when the lemur coiled around her head. Anyway, didn't you say that guy Longfang killed Jet in your world? If he's really siding with Wu then I don't want anything to do with her. But those generals really annoy me, too, so I'm not a fan of either side. Not taking sides at all? Who's the airbender now? Aang asked, sticking out his tongue at her. She punched him in the arm in response. Longfang. Zuko asked. What's he doing? Aang explained the details of their meeting with Fong and both firebenders rubbed their chins in identical poses deep in thought. Azula was first to speak. Did you trust the generals in your world? They weren't as involved in leadership of the city, Aang said. It was all Longfang. Once we exposed him and he got thrown in prison we started working more closely with the generals, but some of them were different. Fong wasn't part of the Council of Five then. But it didn't really matter, anyway, once Azula took over the city she threw them all in prison, too. And in my world Wu didn't have anything to do with Ba Sing Se, she was just a fortune teller I met once in a village far from here. What are you all talking about? Mai asked, leaning against the wall nearest to the door. Aang's stomach dropped, he had forgotten she was there and let his defenses down. He scratched the back of his head, grinning sheepishly. Well. It's a long story. Aang's from another world, Azula said, waving her hand dismissively. One where I'm evil, Zuzu's a traitor to the Fire Nation, and you and I were best friends until I killed you for betraying me too. Old news. She quirked an eyebrow. Okay then, she said, blinking as her only other reaction. Carry on. Zuko looked at his sister and cringed at her explanation. I'll fill you in on the details later, Mai. He crossed his arms and looked back at Aang. So let's just find your friend Bumi, then. Aang shrugged. I don't even know where to start. He could be anywhere, Bumi's a mad genius and I wouldn't put anything past him. There's a chance he could be evil, too, Toph said. You never know. No way, said Aang. Bumi's Bumi. There was no chance Bumi was capable of anything like that. He hoped the former king of Omasha was another constant in this world, just like Longfang's deviousness seemed to be. He turned to Mai, remembering something else that had come up from their meeting with Fong. Mai, you said you are going to recall some of your warriors here, into the city. Yeah, she responded. That was mostly to get Fong to stop complaining. Can I ask for your help? He asked. You and the other Roku warriors. She shrugged. We're allies with the Avatar, always. He smiled. Great. I want you to do what you can to make sure Wu and the Council of Five are telling the truth. Sneak in on their war meetings, follow the daily. Make sure they're not doing anything like meeting in secret underground facilities and brainwashing people. Report to any of us whenever you think it's safe to. All of us have to be careful in this city, never let your guard down. Sure thing, she said, nodding. Mai stood up straight, pulled her hands out of her pockets, and turned to Zuko. I should get going then, I need to send a message to my warriors at Sanctuary Gate. Want to come with me? You can tell me more about this mysterious other world where I'm dead. She gave him a hint of a smile. Sounds dreary. Zuko grinned back. Of course. Thanks, Mai, Aang said, waving them off. Mai sure isn't bothered by that, huh? Azula crossed her arms again. I don't think anything's capable of bothering that girl. She held up a rolled-up scroll to him tied with a white ribbon. Anyway, this letter arrived while you were gone. It's Kunna. She's in the city with Piandao and wants to meet you later tonight. Suki snapped open the paper fan, letting Sokka admire the artwork adorning it. The artist had painted a fierce tigerdillo on lavender paper hunting through a misty bamboo forest, while a matching fan depicted a dragon instead, its whiskers coiling and becoming part of the mist. What do you think? Are these a good replacement? She asked, leaning toward him with a coy smile. They look pretty, but also useless, he said. You have your blade fans at home. These aren't meant to be weapons, dummy, she said, snapping them shut. The smile hadn't gone away, though. We have bags at home, too, but you still insisted on getting that new one because you liked how it looked. Sokka patted the green satchel on his hip. But it was a good deal and satchels are always useful. You made a point of making it match your new clothes. So? Again, I stress, I have an eye for a good deal. Got that from your gran, didn't you? Suki teased him but realized what she said a moment later, her smile faltering. Oh. Sorry. Sokka felt his mood darken and scowled. Don't mention her to me. He didn't want to ruminate on the fact that she left him at the Avatar's mercy anymore. After they paused, the merchant they had been standing in front of looked back and forth between them, an array of multicolored fans displaying all sorts of painted scenes splayed out behind him. So, you two kids gonna buy anything? No, Sokka said, walking ahead to the next stall. The Paper Lantern neighborhood was well named, streets crammed with vendors lined this whole section of Ba Sing Se and paper lanterns lit all of it, organized by color. This part of the city was particularly known for its bazaar where paper artisans peddled all kinds of products, stationery, scroll work, pinwheels, kites, lanterns in all sorts of strange swirling designs and shapes, fans, folded artwork, and more. Sokka had his eye on a hanging wall scroll inscribed with poems about the sea in delicate calligraphy, but had to remind himself that it was something his grandmother would have liked and she wasn't there. Being in the lower ring, they had no sense of privacy and the bazaar's twisting alleyways felt cramped with people, but there was a sense of livelihood and plain fun about the neighborhood. Gashiun, hey! Suki called, squeezing through the crowd. The sandbender waited on the corner, leaning against a stall that sold paper versions of the Earth Kingdom insignia set on folding screens. Sokka's bad mood deepened upon seeing him. Anything? Gashiun asked, moving only his head in their direction when they approached. He still masked part of his face with cloth, leaving only his eyes and nose visible. Sokka supposed that was a step up. No, Sokka said. Scattered around this part of the city were a handful of potential rendezvous points. Gashiun knew where they could contact Katara and Yu, spots where Ba Sing Se's underground connected with the city above. That meant they had to hang around wells, a fountain, and multiple sewer grates to wait for her, but apparently they hadn't made it through yet. And a little hello would be nice. You know, some respect for the people you're stuck with. You've done nothing to deserve it yet. Sokka clenched his fist and shook it at him, but Suki grabbed his arm with both hands. You know who you're talking to, right? Come on, Sokka, she said. He does know. Just don't get into a fight or you'll jeopardize the mission. Sokka bristled. No, if he wants to say something to me he can say it man to man. What, gonna ignore me cause I'm a woman? A girl, but yes. Suki stomped her foot, her arms rigid at her sides and face set in anger. Are you serious? After all this time you're still going to be like that? Sokka scowled again. You forget your place. At that, Gashiun stood up straight, glaring at him. No, you forget yours. Where we are, your status means nothing right now. Suki crossed her arms. Funny how you become a jerk again the moment Katara's not around. Sokka spotted sand crawling up Gashiun's leg and recognized the subtle threat. I respect your sister, the sandbender said. Not you. Yeah, well, she's never gonna like you, Sokka said. She may have used her feminine wiles on you, but that doesn't mean anything. He wriggled his fingers at Gashiun with the words, feminine wiles. At that, the Siwang native rolled his eyes, turned around, and headed back toward their apartment down a crooked road lined with blue lanterns. I'm gonna go check another sewer grate, Suki said, wandering off in a different direction. See you. Sokka watched her go, vague feelings of regret churning in his stomach, but said nothing. It seemed Earth Kingdom officials knew little about an avatar foregoing worldly possessions because Aang's bedroom was filled with all sorts of decadence he had no care for. His bed was made in layers of silken sheets in varying shades of Earth Kingdom green, still mussed up from his earlier nap. A bamboo chest sat in the corner, atop which he found vials of multicolored liquids that Aang suspected to be perfumes. Opulent robes lined with jade or opals or pearls hung inside of a wardrobe in another corner next to a rack with matching hats on top and several pairs of shoes on bottom. Next to the circular window overlooking the most beautiful parts of the koi ponds, Aang came face to face with his own reflection in a claw-footed mirror that depicted puzzlement. He had no idea what to make of all this. A knock at the door saved him from further deliberations. You can come in, he bid them. He saw Azula in the mirror when she opened the door, leaning against its frame. Your room is the same size as mine. Color me surprised, I thought the Avatar would get special treatment. I don't need much space, he said, turning to face her with arms spread. I don't need any of this stuff. This is special treatment. She strode over to the wardrobe, running a finger along the sleeve of a formal robe. Well, you might need some of this for the feast in 2 days. He grinned. I dunno. I don't think I've ever dressed up for something nice like that. Azula chuckled. No, surely not. She glanced at the mirror and then back at him. Sokka wasn't there at the battle. I'm sure you noticed. Aang scratched the back of his head. His hair was long enough now to run his fingers through, he'd have to look into cutting it before the feast. I did, but I had something else on my mind. Is that what you came here to talk about? Azula nodded and then examined her fingernails. I know you did. But don't you find that suspicious? And another thing, Katara and the other girl were wearing Earth Kingdom clothes. He shrugged. Sokka's more of a strategist type, even in this world. He was probably coordinating the attack somewhere on one of those ships. He kicked at the corner of a throw rug in the center of the bedroom, noticing the green vine pattern that matched the drapes. And there's still a lot I don't know about Katara. Maybe she disguised herself because she was already at the gate for the surprise attack. Maybe she just likes green in this world, who knows. She flipped her wavy hair over her shoulder, looking in the mirror as she brushed it with her fingers but stared at Aang's reflection. Maybe. But you failed to tell me about blood bending, too. Is that something she can do in your world? What would I have done to counter that if you weren't there? I didn't even know bending like that existed. I'm sorry, he said. She can do it in my world, but hated that power. I didn't know she could use it here. Like I said, I don't know this Katara and I don't know what she's capable of. And without a full moon, too. He frowned, still unsure of what to make of that. He had to think of a counter. Dwelling on it too long disturbed him. No, I think you're fully aware of what she's capable of but you're just blind to it, she said, turning to him. This isn't the same Katara you know, not the same Katara you love. She's evil. He sat back against the bed, arms crossed and suddenly interested in his shoes. Remember what I told you right after you guys all learned everything about me? About how I thought, despite everything, there was a piece deep inside of Princess Azula that could be saved. He looked back up at her. I have to give Princess Katara that chance, too. Even if there's still so much I need to learn about her. And what if she's so much worse than me? Azula asked. What if Katara is completely irredeemable? What will you do then? Her voice rose in volume with every question, not shouting quite yet, but he sensed a note of desperation in her tone and wasn't sure what to make of that. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I have to believe. If she's worse, A monster without a shred of good in her. You can run away, she said, throwing her arm out wide. Back to your world where you can fall into her arms and everything will be okay and you'll be fighting to the death with me again. He stood up, fists clenched but his chest clenched tighter. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, she said, eyes wet but not quite yet tearing. Her voice shook with the effort to keep it steady. Have you even given any thought to what might happen to this world once you return home? That we'll go on living without you in it, perhaps even without an avatar at all. He thought he saw a hint of something wild behind the amber of her eyes. That one day, you're going to leave behind Zuko, Sabi, Appa, and Toph? What about me? Azula, What am I saying? She asked, rubbing away a tear before it could fall. Of course you wouldn't miss us. You'd be returning to versions of us, or rather, them, that you know better. Fought with longer. Love like a family. Don't be ridiculous, he said. His voice was hard enough, his face stern enough, to draw her gaze squarely to his. There is no Sabi in my world. We had a lemur named Momo instead. Her mouth hung open a fraction of an inch and for a moment he relished the fact that he managed to make her look dumbfounded, and then she laughed. Softly at first, but then it quickly progressed to the point where tears fell and she clutched at her stomach, doubled over. It was the most genuine laughter he had ever heard from Azula, and it was infectious, because soon enough he found himself doubled over in mirth just like hers. After what felt like minutes where he could barely breathe, she managed to form words. So Sabi is new, huh? Guess I should appreciate her more if she'll be what keeps you here. He put a hand on her shoulder, clutching it in what he hoped was a gesture of comfort as they both sat on the edge of the bed. I don't know what's going to happen, he said. I don't know when or how or if I'll ever be able to go back. But I want you to know that I've come to treasure my time here. He grasped her hand instead and smiled. You and Zuko and all the others have become just as much a part of my family as the others. When, and if, that day comes where I have to go back, I don't know if there's going to be a version of me left behind or the next avatar in the cycle or no one at all. But I want you, Zuko, Toph, Sabi, and Appa at my side the whole way there, okay? She squeezed his hand once and then pulled it away, standing up again and going to the door. There's no question about that, she said. She took a deep breath and then she was Azula again. Well, I ought to be off to bed. I'd love to come to your meeting with the old bats but I have no desire to stay up through the whole night. Zuzu's probably in the main room waiting for you. He smiled and stood. You're right. I better get going. Good night, Azula. Good night, Aang. For the first time, he let himself consider the idea of a future in this world and what it might hold if he never had a chance to go back home. More than once, Katara wondered if the infiltration mission into the tunnels beneath Ba Sing Se had really been a good idea or if she had inadvertently doomed them all. She never would have made it through without Gashiun's maps and directions. There were so many crisscrossing tunnels and caverns that it was a wonder anyone managed to map it at all, even if the path to the inner walls of the city was the only part he knew. Some tunnels coiled around in circles before branching off into different paths. Some were wide enough for Katara to walk abreast with 24 men and others narrow enough that they were forced to proceed single file. Some descended into depths with pits so black and so deep that when Katara threw a stone she never heard it hit the bottom, while others had sharp turns to dead ends. They had come across caverns and wide-open chambers so high that Katara was certain they'd see sunlight, but it turned out they were much deeper underground than she had previously thought. They kept track of time with candles and stopped once to rest through the night in a chamber big enough to house the entire invading force, some 300 soldiers. Katara knew that the city was built atop ancient cities that came before it, but she never would have guessed that the precursors to Ba Sing Se spread beyond the inner walls that stood today. Where swathes of farmland extended in fields up above, hopefully, if Gashiun's maps were correct, they came across ruins deep below. Some of the tunnels had been carved into hallways, their masonry holding up after all these years. They found statues without faces or any distinguishing features, worn away by time. A few times they passed by artifacts made of gold or other precious metals, some rusted away, discarded or lost long ago. One goblet encrusted with a few pieces of glowing crystal caught Katara's eye until one of her soldiers pilfered it like they did all the rest. They even discovered aqueducts that still ran with clean water from a source they couldn't see, a welcome find nonetheless. They marched mostly in silence or uneasy whispers. Early on, one soldier tried to sing, but his echoes crooned back to him and no one liked the sound it made against the stone, so no one tried again. In one massive cavern, they came across the skeleton of a temple abandoned long ago like everything else down here, with 3 minarets still standing proud while the 4th had fallen some years ago, crumbled in a pile in front of it. Several soldiers stopped to pray and meditate and bend, anything to keep from feeling like they'd never emerge from the depths. You led them in prayer, because out of everyone she still seemed the least disturbed. Katara didn't blame them. They still had a ways to go. Sokka looked down into the shadows in the well, listening to the water babbling down the city's underground waterways far below. This one was situated in a square right outside the apartment Gashiun had managed to secure for them, a ramshackle thing with only 2 rooms and 1 iron bed with a ratty mattress Sokka suspected might be infested with some sort of bedroaches. The bed was for Suki, who, in light of Sokka's earlier observations, probably didn't sleep in it anyway, so he had no desire to return and hunker down in the same room as the Sandbender for the night. "This isn't what I expected from the lower ring," a voice behind him said. Sokka turned around so sharply that he lost balance for a moment and feared for an even shorter moment that he was going to fall into the well. But the speaker was only Gashiun, and Sokka cursed himself for almost waterbending as a reflex. "There is beauty here." The square where they had found themselves intersected with the Blue Lantern District and the Red Lantern District, casting the Sandbender in soft purple light. Sokka responded with a steely gaze from his single eye. "What do you want?" Gashiun looked up at the sky. Sokka only saw a handful of stars despite it being a clear night. "I miss the desert moon," he said, removing the part of his mask that covered his mouth. "It kept me company on many cold nights. The desert's not far away." "You can go back," Sokka said. The Sandbender turned back to Sokka. His eyes reminded the Waterbender of beetles, dark and shiny. "You still don't trust me?" Sokka scoffed. "Duh. Why should I?" He paused. "Better yet, why do you trust us?" "My sister. When I met her, it was shortly after I stopped hearing from my own sister," he said, leaning against the stone well. "At a place called the Misty Palms Oasis, where I had stopped on my way back from here after I was supposed to see Nagi." At Sokka's questioning look, he added, "My sister. We met beneath the city when she could sneak away from her daily training, communicating with letters otherwise. Aren't they like?" Sokka drew in a fraction closer, lowering his voice. "The secret police in this city? Why would she want to join them?" "Yes, but they also protect and preserve the cultural heritage of Ba Sing Se," he said. "The history and art, the music, and the stories." That part appealed to her more, since the culture of our own people has changed much in recent years. "How so?" Gashiun twirled sand through his fingers like a piece of string. "Those who don't flock here flocked to the desert. Where there's no water there are no waterbenders. And where there are many different peoples there are also many different cultures. Some were bound to get swallowed up, though much of it changed to something new, too, if you ask me. Ah. Anyway, Nagi didn't want the same to happen for the rest of the Earth Kingdom, so she came here. But one day she stopped answering, and on the crescent moon when we were supposed to meet she never showed. My mother died years ago from sun fever and our father has always been absent, so she was all I had. This was 2 years ago." "Let me guess," said Sokka. "Katara fed you her sob story about how our mother is gone, too, and you ate it up." Gashiun shrugged. "She also helped me beat up some guys from a rival tribe that tried to mug me, but yeah," he said. "Hate to break it to you, buddy, but she milks that for all it's worth with anyone who'll listen," he said. "And since she is who she is," he was careful not to say a princess, in case someone listened from the shadows, "that's just about everyone. Even so, the feelings behind it are genuine." "Maybe, at one point," Sokka said. "When we were kids. But that's ancient history now." "She also mentioned a brother," Gashiun continued. "A brave warrior, a brilliant strategist, and creative inventor who exiled himself shortly before that." A brother that she always wanted to return home so they could be a family again. She can stroke my ego all she wants, and really, she could, but that doesn't change what she did. She's the reason we're not a family anymore. He stood and turned back to the well, leaning over it so that his whale tooth necklace dangled over the abyss. When I try to picture my mom's face, all I can see is Katara because I blame her for what happened. She alienated our grandmother until the day of my ice-dodging trial, and she's the reason our dad stopped at least pretending to love us. But she doesn't see it that way. It's all a game to her, some sick desire to see everyone wrapped around her finger. He clenched his fists, pressing his knuckles against the stone so hard that they turned white. He didn't know why he poured this all out to Gashiun, but it came easier than he would have thought. He wanted to see Gran, to talk to her just once. But that was impossible now. She had sided with the Avatar. After all that, Gashiun's face remained impassive. A gentle breeze brushed by the lanterns above, causing the blues and reds and purples to dance and morph together until the flame inside died out, casting them both in darkness. Whether or not that's true, it's hard not to follow her. She calls me a friend, and this path will lead me back to my sister. He started walking back toward the apartment, but Sokka's following observation made him pause. You love my sister, don't you? He supposed he should have felt angry, protective, but he couldn't muster that much emotion over it. Not in the way you think, Gashiun responded. As a friend, perhaps. A leader, more likely. Well, she's just using you. Then I will use her in return. And you, if I must. Sokka shrugged and followed after him with a yawn, deciding he may as well head to bed too. Then I'm glad we're finally being honest with each other. The lower ring was exactly how Aang remembered it. Buildings and people crammed too closely together. Children ran unaccompanied through the winding, uneven streets even at this time of night, faces gaunt with hunger. Stew pots boiled on the sides of the street tended to by cooks with subdued smiles who handed food to hopeful people, mixing the sense of spices with the pungent stench of spoiled vegetables and something worse. Even so, Aang preferred this ring to the middle and upper ones. He didn't have the feeling he was being watched. He supposed that was the reason why Kunna and Piandao had wanted to meet them here. Aang wasn't sure where he was supposed to go, exactly, but he was spared long hours of fruitless searching when a little old woman hooked her arm in his, leading him along different streets with surprising strength. Come along, dearie, she said, and Aang recognized her as Kunna even with the tattered shawl covering her head. She led Aang and Zuko to a tiny ground-floor apartment, ushering them inside while she looked up and down the street before ducking in after them. She lowered her shawl and smiled. Glad to see you kids got into the city without incident. Aang looked around, though there wasn't much to see in the threadbare room. Piandao sat on a bed in the corner, his sword hidden from sight, but he stood when they entered and exchanged bows with Aang and Zuko. I hope you two are well. Same to you, master, said Aang. Did your wound heal okay? Piandao put a hand on his shoulder where Katara had impaled him. Thanks to Kunna. As expected from the best healer known to the world. Kunna handed both boys cups of green tea she had brewed and bustled around the apartment, going in and out of the other room that Aang assumed was her bedroom to fetch cushions for them to sit on as they talked. Apologies for the mess, she said. We only just arrived in the city this morning. Despite that, Aang could already see signs of homey touches. An unadorned vase of flowers sat on the shuttered windowsill and a pie show board had already been set up underneath it, half played. Mess? Piandao asked, crossing his arms with a wry smile. You've been sweeping and cleaning since we got here. Why don't you come to the upper ring with us? Zuko asked, sharing a glance with Aang. We have plenty of room. I'd rather avoid unnecessary scrutiny, said Kunna. This is just fine for us. How'd you get through so quickly? Aang asked. I thought the sanctuary gate attack had them temporarily closing the city to incoming refugees. Kunna gave him a smile that was almost cheeky. As I've told you, we have our connections. What? How? Zuko asked. The White Lotus, Aang observed. You mentioned it before, back when you told us to go find the astronomer. Piandao joined them on the floor, drinking from his teacup with the utmost poise. Indeed. Did you see my grandchildren in the attack? Kunna asked. She gently lowered to her knees, letting out a sigh once she situated herself and drank her tea. I fought Katara, Aang said, trying to keep his voice steady. It still felt so strange to say. She used blood bending on us, but we managed to hold her off long enough for soldiers to arrive and fight back. They withdrew. Kunna looked into her tea. Blood bending, you say? It is not a full moon. She has improved. She locked eyes with him again. And Sokka? Not there, Aang replied. Azula thinks he's up to something. But that's possible? To blood bend without a full moon. With enough practice, yes, she said. And natural talent. Katara has both and the tutelage of the one who created the art. Hamma, Aang said. A chill crept up and down his spine and all three of them looked at him. Zuko furrowed his brow. Who? You know her, Kunna said. I suppose I'm not surprised. I taught Katara how to waterbend until she met Hamma and decided blood bending was the secret to power and control. Aang scowled. Even in my world, Hamma was evil. She was my first friend when I journeyed to the South Pole to marry my husband. And for a long time, my only friend, Kunna continued. She was one of the first to speak out against the oppressive rules imposed upon women in our tribes, and the most outspoken. She and I practiced our waterbending together in secret. Naturally, by the time Katara was old enough, she took a liking to Hamma. By this point Hamma had discovered bloodbending and taught it to me, even though I was horrified by it. She thought Katara should learn it, too, and I disagreed, and from then on I was no longer her teacher. To be fair, imposing your will upon another is no less horrifying than some of the other things the bending arts are capable of, Piandao pointed out. Fire bending and earth bending are capable of just as much destruction. He looked to Aang. And I am sure airbending is, as well, though no airbenders to my knowledge have ever explored that side of it. They wouldn't have, Aang said, frowning. Though Aang was unsure if he himself was capable of it or not, at this point. But I guess it all depends on how the bender would use it. I've seen my fair share of what people could do. Sokka had drawn the same conclusion, said Kunna. Which is why I taught him how to do it, too, after his exile. Aang almost dropped his tea. Sokka's a bloodbender. Not a very good one, I must admit, Kunna said, shrugging. But yes, he convinced me. I figured he should know, just in case. I trusted him not to abuse it. She sighed again. Right, then. If Sokka is indeed up to something, then we will pass it along. To your contacts, Aang surmised. Who are they? What is the White Lotus? Kunna smiled. A Paisho piece and the symbol upon that headband you used to wear. A secret society, Piandao explained once. Aang and Zuko gave annoyed looks at Kunna's words. One dedicated to the pursuit of balance and shared knowledge between all the nations, regardless of borders. Though they even set me up with a job as a calligrapher in the Paper Lantern District. How about that? Zuko leaned forward. Really? So they can help us? Where are they? Is Bumi a member? Aang remembered, years ago, when he overheard a conversation between Bumi and Master Zhang Zhang as they prepared to fight Ozai during the comet. He had a feeling they knew each other before the battle, but there was never any time to really talk. The White Lotus secrets are not for the uninitiated, Kunna said. We are only telling you this much because you are the Avatar. And besides, I am still new, so there is still much I do not know myself. Aang put down his teacup. But it's as you said, I'm the Avatar. No one's more dedicated to peace and balance than I am. Kunna calmly sipped from her teacup and placed it down, folding her hands in her lap. The White Lotus Society has decided you cannot be trusted yet. Aang felt his face get hot. What? Why? You are rash and impulsive, she told him, her eyes hard as ice. You kidnapped Sokka from me after we agreed you would hand him back over to my care. You stole from Piandao. The two of us may have decided to look past those deeds, but the White Lotus has deemed you too much of a wild card. Aang had to squeeze his own hands to keep from trembling with anger. You told them all that? What else did you tell them? The secret of your otherworldly circumstance is safe with us, do not worry, said Piandao, who looked on edge. But even the spiritualists among them have noticed the effects of the unbalanced spirit world, the merging between them. They see it as you neglecting your duties. Zuko frowned. Can't you bring us to meet them so Aang can explain? It's not his fault. We'll back him up. Aang scowled. I told you both why I did those things. It was so I could help Sokka see that he was on the wrong side. And now I have to do the same for Katara. You cannot force redemption upon anybody, Kunna said. It takes time and patience. It's an uneven road different for everyone. The walker may often stumble upon it, even turn away, but it is a road only they can choose to travel. And it's a road you need to walk for yourself, Avatar Aang. For the first time as he looked at the old woman, he found her so unlike Uncle Iroh that it made his heart ache for the man with the kindly smile and silly antics that concealed his gentle wisdom. Kunna, on the other hand, was more calculating than he ever was. I will support your journey, she continued. For your destiny is forever intertwined with that of my grandchildren and your other friends, perhaps doubly so. And what about your son? Aang asked, his face dark. His head hurt with exhaustion. Emperor Hakata is your son, isn't he? Is it my destiny to defeat him, too? Kunna frowned. I think you have taken on that destiny from another. But I cannot say for sure. No one responded for a moment, and she took advantage of the lull in conversation to stand and collect their empty teacups. It is late and I am tired, she said. We should all get some rest. Thanks for the tea, Aang said, finding that any animosity he had towards them had drained away to be replaced by a desire to sleep. He felt so tired. And the update? What do we do next? Gain the trust of the White Lotus, said Piandao. They may have an assignment for you in the coming days. He walked over to the corner of the room with the Pai Sho board and plucked a piece from it, pressing it to Zuko's palm. A White Lotus tile, Zuko said, rolling it between his fingers. You know, it's a piece in my uncle's favorite gambit. I'm familiar with the strategy, Piandao said. I don't know how they'll deliver their assignment to you, but keep an eye out. And be safe, my students. By the time Aang and Zuko returned home, it was well after midnight. Aang dropped into bed without bothering to take off his clothes, his mind swirling from all the day's meetings and conversations and sides and secrets. He fell asleep before he could deliberate who he could trust the most. Check the description for the links to the author.